Who would have thought that this situation would have such a strong impact on the life of the young heroine? In the past, the lady died cruelly, so this time she decided to take her fate into her own hands. This little miss's name was Cephale Allegro, and she knew a lot about this world because of her reincarnation. The aristocrats were eagerly awaiting the moment when this dirty little thing would be thrown out of the banquet hall. Soon the butler Elton, who always dealt with such cases, came out to meet the lady. Confusion overwhelmed the heroine, but she did not want to return to her terrible family. But she had all the documents proving that she was an aristocrat of the great Allegro family. So the girl explained to this man that she wanted to become the bride of the young Duke Remdragon. It is worth saying that there were 4 powerful families in this empire, and each wealthy family had its own area of responsibility, including the defense of the great power. Throughout their lives, the representatives of this alliance tried to maintain the bar so as not to be expelled, and among them, a family stood out in particular, which for many years was ruled by real dragons. It was Remdragon who announced the recruitment of a bride for the young ruler of the family this year. And Cephale put forward her candidacy because only in someone else's family could she hide from her own. Only recently did the heroine discover that for some reason she had been transported to the distant past of her childhood. But Lady Allegro lived her entire life in captivity with a family that sincerely hated her. The girl's thoughts were filled with a desire for revenge on the relatives who had driven her to death. It was only by a miracle that she managed to escape and apply for a bride for the capricious but handsome Duke. Elton had no right to turn away candidates, no matter how bad they looked at the banquet. Only Cephale knew what to say to make the heir of Remdragon choose her as his wife. Therefore, the little girl boldly declared that she would be ready to divorce him at any moment in the future. No one present expected that these words would attract the attention of the younger Duke of Ergu. Only the maids of the Remdragon estate applauded in approval after their master was chosen. This is all because the heroine thought through her behavior at this important social event in advance. The girl's happiness knew no bounds, because until the very end, she did not believe in the success of her plan. But now, Cephale was saved from the persecution of her relatives, who wanted to kill her. Because the young Duke, distinguished by his beauty, never broke his promises. To better understand the plot of this world, it is worth talking about the 4 ruling families. It was from Allegro that the heroine ran away, even though they were descendants of powerful magicians of the empire. But she did not seek help from the Pullet family, despite the fact that they were responsible for all the laws. The lady did not dare to turn to the Syrian family, who were responsible for import and export in the country. Instead, Cephale went straight to the Remdragon clan, which was feared by everyone around her. From the very beginning, no one said anything good about the Allegro family's illegitimate daughter. The girl was born healthy and beautiful, but this was not enough for the family's love. Instead, her relatives imprisoned the lady and mistreated her throughout her life. Many were afraid to even look at Cephale, as if she were a cursed child. And only Duke Vitego Allegro treated his daughter calmly, to whom he did not give a drop of love. However, the little girl still looked forward to meeting him, hoping for praise. Every time the little girl watched with greed as the Duke showed kindness to someone else. It so happened that the girl's intelligence quickly impressed Vitego, who was looking for talent in his family. So soon the lady achieved the desired praise in return for providing many calculations. But at that moment, the heroine had no idea that Allegro was cruelly lying to her right to her face. The lady's happiness was genuine, but with such a terrible father, it could not last long. But then the girl, who was so desperately looking for at least some kind of support, was not worried about the terrible future. That's how Cephale obediently began to carry out all the difficult tasks that her magicians entrusted to her from the shadows. But the family's attitude towards her never changed, even though her father constantly gave her false smiles. Each time, there were more and more documents that needed to be filled out. But Cephale had no intention of giving up, no matter how hard it was for her to help her father for free. She was greatly helped by research into people who remained in captivity after their death. The little girl tried not to think about what had happened to the previous researchers of magic. When the lady could not find the answer at all, a man from a dream came to her aid. After such visions, Cephale always woke up with a clear and logical answer in her head. But the girl's genius inevitably aroused envy in her family, and it started with her father. Vitego could not come to terms with the fact that all the skills went only to his illegitimate daughter, while the sons could not even boast of mastery of the sword due to their stupidity. So, when Cephale turned 18, her father began to experiment on her. The man tried his best to extract the girl's abilities in order to give them to his sons. But, as long as the heroine received recognition from Vitego, the reasons for his attention did not matter to her. So the Duke freely manipulated the girl, who had obediently run after him all her life. And so it was until Seafiel turned 21, when everything changed. Before, the heroine had not even thought that the Duke's attitude was actually a lie. His heartlessness hurt the lady even more than the realization that her assistants were about to kill her. This is because many years ago, one of the Allegro family married a demonic creature, and Seafiel was the carrier of this cursed blood, for which no one in the estate liked her. All the people whose research she read died from exactly the same terrible cause. The truth turned out to be so painful for the heroine that she could not accept it. The girl clung to everything good that her father did for her in prison until the very end. Seafiel clearly remembered that he cared. Otherwise, he wouldn't have smiled at her so warmly. Only now did Vitego admit that he never considered the girl his daughter. This is how the heroine learned that even her own father never had sincere feelings for her. From that moment on, Seafiel's life became so terrible that she constantly wanted to die. But no matter how much Miss begged, her relatives only continued to experiment on her. So, losing consciousness has always been a lifeline for a lady who wanted to forget. In the silence of her swoon, she prayed each time for rebirth and a happy life. And suddenly, the heroine woke up in the middle of a dungeon at the moment when she was only 5 years old. Seafiel didn't immediately believe that everything happening around her was actually real. But there was nothing to rejoice about, because God misunderstood all the young lady's prayers. So she will once again have to live locked up for many years, and then die on her father's orders. Only the visits of her older brothers saved Seafiel a little from the boredom of imprisonment. And this time, one of the guys lost his balance right at the entrance, which made the girl laugh. Before, the Duke's son had not noticed that the usually timid little girl boldly laughed at him. But the reborn Seafiel was not at all afraid of her relatives, who constantly offended her. So the guys faced unexpected resistance, because Miss did not hesitate to quarrel with them. But what frightened the fallen heir most of all was the blood that flowed down his young face. If only these boys knew how much blood Seafiel had shed, they certainly wouldn't have been so frightened by even a drop. From now on, the heroine did not feel fear towards people who worried even about such a trifle. She was easily able to frighten her older brothers, because only before she had stupidly obeyed them. But in reality, the Duke's sons could do nothing without his permission, so Seafiel had every chance to take revenge on her family and escape from it. In this life, the little girl also immersed herself in research, but only for the sake of her plan for revenge. From that moment on, the heroine was going to do everything to become happy, in spite of her relatives. What made the lady's situation most difficult was that she was still locked up. That's why Seafiel began to think so carefully about her plan to escape from prison. However, even in this case, the treacherous relatives could easily find the girl. So the lady needed something that would prevent her family from taking her back into captivity. The little girl knew a lot of information about the past because she diligently collected data, so she quickly remembered that Remdragon would soon be looking for a bride. This family was known for its hot temper and hatred of Allegro, so it was suitable for Seafiel. Moreover, in the past, the Duke also chose as his wife a lady who belonged to the enemy's clan. In fact, for many years, dragons did not like people, but they united with them. They descended from the heavens to get rid of the demons that were ravaging the human world, and humanity entrusted its lives to the dragons, who were the lesser evil of them all. However, the condition of the agreement was the engagement between the dragon and the human with the birth of a child. Although the Remdragon family planned to leave for another world, they followed all the rules of the agreement. As a result, the Duke's former wife was left with nothing, as Erga cruelly divorced her. After the dragons disappeared, this lady told all the aristocrats about her pain. She lived in wealth all this time, while she simply wanted love from the Remdragons. It was these words of the madam that sank into the soul of the heroine, who was watching from the side at that moment. Then the heroine found the claims of the lady who was abandoned strange. After all, for Seafiel, such good living conditions were something incredible and wonderful. If Lady Allegro had her way, she would have lived her entire life in exactly this situation. Miss did not need any accomplishments from her husband, because she could accomplish them herself. That's how Seafiel came to the idea that she could take the place of Duke Remdragon's bride. But before that, the girl still had to figure out how to escape from the dark confinement. The relatives continued to bother the little girl with their presence, humiliating her every time. And their example was followed by an ordinary assistant named Roto, who looked after the lady. But this time, the heroine did not experience wild fear at the sight of the guy who freely mocked her. The lady was saved by the fact that she knew perfectly well about Roto's future, that he would be mired in debt. So now Seafiel had every chance to take advantage of the stupid and unlucky assistant. The guy clearly didn't expect that the girl in the dungeon would know anything about his bad deeds at home and at work. But Seafiel really did know in advance everything that would happen to this man in the future. So Roto suddenly found himself attached to the girl he had previously considered dirt. In just a couple of days, the heroine managed to completely charm her assistant with the fact that she predicted everything. She deliberately told him nice things so that the guy would completely trust only her. This is how the little girl became something of a real heroine for a man who often lost in gambling. From now on, Roto was ready to do anything for the lady, if only to continue receiving advice from her. He tried to provide the girl with everything necessary to make her existence in prison easier. Looking at him, Seafiel couldn't believe that she had actually been afraid of such a stupid assistant before. And soon the time came when the heroine needed to scare her faithful assistant. Roto immediately believed the girl's words, that something terrible awaited him in the near future. He feared death more than anything in the world, because he had so much ambition and unfulfilled desires. In fact, Allergo planned to use the guy who bullied her in her past life. She needed the guy to take her to a certain flower, but it was just a distraction. Even Roto was not allowed to leave the estate without permission, as he belonged to the Allergo family. But the lady didn't care about these details, because she needed to get out of prison somehow. So the girl left her assistant no chance of escaping punishment because of her. In the end, Roto fell for the little girl's lie, since she had never lied to him before. The guy quickly went to carry out all orders in order to supposedly save himself. So, soon the lady received the long-awaited clothes that were pleasant to her body. Roto then got the girl a vehicle so she could go with him, and the heroine was going to use all this for her spectacular escape from the terrible Allergo family. This is how the heroine achieved her desired goal in the form of the Rem Dragon estate. Although it was difficult for her, the girl arrived just in time, and people were just gathering for the event in the main hall. She understood that she had miraculously escaped danger, because Roto had almost caught her while she was escaping. As soon as she appeared, Elton announced the beginning of the casting for the role of the daughter-in-law of the young Duke of Remdragon. At the same time, the butler did not show any hint that Erga would appear before the people anytime soon. The heroine remembered well what the girl who was chosen by the young heir in her past life had said. She swore that she would live only for the sake of the young man, and would even be ready to die if he demanded it. So the lady was going to get ahead of that girl in order to safely take her place in this family. Many began to boast about their rich family, which would increase the finances of the Remdragon family. One of the girls proudly announced that he was a relative of a famous aristocrat. And even more ladies talked about how their families had the best swordsmen of all possible. And now it was the heroine's turn, and she was not going to miss her chance for a better life. The girl knew exactly what she needed to say to make sure the Duke paid attention to her. But even the lady did not expect that Erga would so quickly accept her offer of divorce at any moment. Before, Seafiel could only dream of eating normal food, and now she had been chosen, so Miss no longer had to worry about her future, which promised to be good. Naturally, discontent immediately began to spread among the aristocrats due to such a strange decision. But Elton skillfully answered every objector, since the master's words were law for him. The heroine recognized the woman, who was the mother of the bride of the heir of Remdragon in the past. Allegro didn't expect that Madame would attack her so strongly because of her victory in the elections. The aristocrat was not going to stop at anything, because it concerned her daughter's happiness. Seafiel was too small to respond adequately to the woman who was screaming so loudly. As a result, the little girl tripped over the fabric that was right behind her the whole time. With this, she revealed to everyone that Ergo was sitting calmly on the throne, hiding behind the red curtain. Throughout the empire, legends circulated about the beauty of the dragon children who had entered into an alliance with humans. And the young heir confirmed these rumors, since his appearance was difficult to convey in words. The boy had a grumpy character, full of dignity, inherent only to his family, so the lady could not squeeze out a word, immersed in admiring the beauty of the young man. Only now, the boy himself spoke out in front of the people, who loudly demanded justice. He always had a short conversation with the disputants, on whom he would set the panther. The animal obeyed its owner so well that it immediately headed towards the woman. And only the little girl dared to stand up for the madam who had recently offended her with words. Although she was trembling like an aspen leaf, she stubbornly did not take a single step to the side. Tears streamed down Sophiel's face. She was terribly scared, but wanted to be happy. The Duke's heart sank painfully at this picture, for he was not a cruel man. So the guy retreated for the first time in a long time, despite the fact that he always punished his opponents. But his panther continued its attack anyway, and few could escape its claws. Even before the collision, the heroine lost consciousness from horror and came to her senses much later. Elton carefully stayed by the girl's side the entire time to monitor her well-being. Sophiel was full of kindness and care, so she was worried about that hostile aristocrat. It turned out that the butler didn't care about the woman who had caused a mess at the ball. The guy believed that the lady could easily live without an arm or a leg for her actions. So the lady realized for the first time what a strange family she had chosen to join. But the girl's joy still knew no bounds, because she had been dreaming of delicious food all this time. But the lady's trials did not end there, as there remained a small formality. Among the servants of the Remdragon estate, there was a snake that was excellent at detecting lies. It was this creature that was recognized to ensure that Sophiel did not mean any harm. And every word of the heroine was full of sincerity, because she wanted the best for herself. The little girl had no idea that she even had to give blood to be admitted. In the end, the entire test went so easily that the lady couldn't believe her eyes. Elton didn't care what the girl thought, because he valued the Duke above everyone else. And Sophiel was happy with this arrangement, since she could finally live freely. The girl even liked the snake, although it did not treat her very well during the interrogation. But the lady was ready to open her heart to everyone in this rich and mysterious estate. And the first ones she came across were two maids who looked like peas in a pod. The little girl couldn't even imagine that there would be other beautiful people at the Duke's estate. The assistants turned out to be unusually caring girls, so they were ready to help the lady. They immediately took control of her to ensure that Miss was satisfied. So, for the first time in a long time, the heroine ate deliciously, without any restrictions on dishes. Then she also took a pleasant bath, which warmed her to the very ossified soul. And in the end, the little girl fell asleep with pleasure in her soft bed, rejoicing in what was happening to her. But heavy thoughts still did not leave the girl, who was afraid for her future. So the first thing she did the next morning was turn to the all-knowing butler. The lady was interested in when her wedding with the Duke would take place, because then they would not be able to send her back. The baby was most worried about the Allergo family remembering her existence, so the lady was ready to do anything to break the unpleasant ties with her terrible relatives. It was only for this reason that the heroine was in such a hurry to marry the grumpy Duke. Elton remembered well that Miss was very frightened at the sight of his serious master. The heir's icy gaze could alarm even the bravest person in a second. Everyone around was surprised when the lady admitted that she considered Ergu the most handsome guy. Sophiel was indeed a sucker for looks, and Remdragon's heir matched her taste. No one had ever seen the young man in this way before, so the butler was pleased. Allergo had no idea how important her simple words could be for others. Elton had cared for the Duke all his life, so he saw how difficult it was for him to be alone. But now the guy could be calm, because Sophiel had no intention of leaving his master. So Erga made the right choice when he noticed this young girl out of all of them. Therefore, the butler hastened to inform the heir how lucky he was with his bride. But at that moment, the young man was not in the mood to listen about a bright future. Since childhood, Erga had been eagerly awaiting the moment when his family would leave this world, and he had no intention of taking Sophiel with him, which he honestly told his faithful assistant. For the boy, the most important thing was the well-being of his family, which was fading away in this world. And Elton had no right to dissuade the gentleman, who had already made up his mind long ago. But inside, the guy was much kinder than he always tried to appear from the outside. That's why he couldn't look at the starving Sophiel, who was now extremely thin and skinny. All this led to the heroine even being given a separate house where she would live. The whole building looked dilapidated, despite the rich arrangement inside and out. But the baby was completely satisfied with the surrounding silence, which was accompanied by happiness. She was happy with every moment that separated her further and further from her terrible relatives. And for them, the lady was going to come up with a real plan of revenge to deal with the opponents. Sophiel did not feel sorry for any of her loved ones, because they all cruelly mocked her. This is how the girl began to spend her weekdays coming up with insidious plans for revenge. All this lasted from early morning until lunch, until the maids called her to take a walk in the garden. The little girl never missed these walks because she was happy to frolic in nature. Moreover, after them, a life-saving bath awaited her, which got rid of the unpleasant smell of the dungeon. Never before had Sophia felt so happy, so she didn't want to change anything. In the dungeon, she didn't even know what hot water and tasty food were. There was only cold and darkness. So she obeyed her assistants in everything, who tirelessly worked for the Duke's bride. The maids were always delighted with how gentle the little girl's character was. As soon as they hinted that it was time for her to go to bed, the lady obediently did everything. The girl always dreamed of enjoying all the joys of life, and now she had such an opportunity. Caring maids, delicious food, and warm water completely relaxed the runaway from the Allergo family. So one day before going to bed, she whispered that she would always like to live in such conditions. And these words frightened the assistants, because they knew about the status of the lady, who was a princess of another family. But the little girl had no idea that she had accidentally caused unrest among the servants. She only accidentally heard words about the assistants being worried about her condition. This was all because the maids were bothered by the fact that the ladies weren't even properly taught anything. In the end, they alarmed Elton himself, who was known for his calm and poise. Chatty girls were capable of making a real tragedy out of many simple things. It wasn't just that they were worried, because they already understood how the family treated their own daughter. It was for this reason that the maids tried so hard to please the little girl in every way. As soon as Sophia appeared somewhere nearby, she noticed changes in the atmosphere around her. The faithful assistants blossomed into gentle smiles, as if they had met the greatest happiness in their lives. All this was so different from what the heroine had seen all this time in the cold dungeon. This concern further pushed the young lady to become stronger. In fact, there were many strange and unpleasant rumors circulating about the Remdragon estate, and he was truthful, who called all the people in this place creatures from another world. Each of the Duke's assistants belonged to one or another unusual race, different from humans. So it was strange for them to realize that the heir had chosen a human girl as his wife. But Sophia could charm anyone she spoke to at first sight. Therefore, the knights were no exception. Although they tried to keep their hearts locked, they instantly took a liking to the girl, who seemed to be the embodiment of kindness. Only at this point did the heroine understand that she no longer had to worry about anything. These knights were many times stronger than ordinary people, which made the little girl incredibly happy. Although she never communicated with the Duke, she heard a lot about him from the butler Elton. Erga clearly didn't expect Sophia to gain popularity in the area so quickly. Even the faithful assistant couldn't help but smile at the thought of the lady's resemblance to a raccoon. The guy had never met such nice people before, so he was completely struck by them. While the heir was irritated by everything around him, that's why he took up the gun again. As luck would have it, it was that night that the heroine woke up, although she usually slept soundly until the morning. Allergo wasn't used to being alone in the middle of a huge, empty mansion. For some reason, at that moment, even the magic lamps that always responded to heat weren't working. Of course, the maids warned the lady about the possibility of this, but it was still unpleasant. Since childhood, the heroine did not like darkness, and now it surrounded her on all sides. But the thunderstorm was not capable of frightening the girl as much as the unknown shadow outside the window. Sophia was ready to swear she saw a person, although the area was well fenced. The worst thing was that Allergo couldn't really find her way back to the estate. The girl had already become quite tired, while she was still wandering around the forest in a panic out of fear. The walls of the mansion seemed very close, but something seemed to be holding the lady back from them. In the middle of the huge forest, which she found herself in by accident, Miss felt even more lonely. The only problem was that the little girl was not alone in this place. Sophia was too weak to do anything against this evil beast, so the lady silently prepared herself for death, since she had no other choice anyway. But at that moment, the heir released the arrow in time, as he was hunting nearby. This is how the heroine miraculously remained alive, despite all the unpleasant circumstances of the situation. But the lady had no idea that Erga was now in no condition to come to her aid. But this mistake could well have led to the girl's death, since Remdragon was in a bad mood. It was the first time the heroine had seen someone look at her with such emotionless and empty eyes. It was clear from the young man's face that he was not joking when he perceived the little girl as prey. During the hunt, Erga was unable to distinguish between people and animals, so he raised his sword against everyone. It was only by a miracle that the heroine survived, as the heir suddenly woke up. But in the morning, he started a showdown. Seafiel thought it was unfair that the young man was trying so hard to act like an adult, while the servants happily played along with the master, just to keep him happy. Only now did the girl realize that she really could have died tonight because of the Duke's actions. Therefore, it was not surprising that the guy barely concealed his anger at the maid for not keeping an eye on the lady. The assistant didn't even think of denying her guilt, since she was used to taking responsibility for everything. But the heroine could not allow such a kind servant to answer for her stupidities that happened at night. The young man clearly did not expect that the lady would personally ask him not to punish anyone for that situation. Seafiel turned on all her charm at that moment, as she wanted to protect her beloved assistant. While she had the opportunity, the little girl also asked once again about the wedding of the heir of the family. Erga was not prepared for his young bride to demand a wedding he had never even thought of. But it was important for the heroine to marry the guy, because then she would become part of his family. This is exactly what Seafiel dreamed about from the very beginning. And she didn't even try to hide her intentions. Any normal person would think 100 times before getting involved with the Remdragon family, out of revenge against the lady. But the little girl saw her salvation only in the Duke, although he did not show her attention or care. And the heroine couldn't explain to the guy that she simply wanted to be included in the family catalog of his family. Fortunately for the girl, the awkward atmosphere was suddenly broken by the maid, who remained grateful to her. The assistant had never been protected by children before, so she found this very sweet. Her sister also fell even more in love with the little girl, who possessed all the qualities of a good person. Only Erga stubbornly hid his heart from the girl who was supposed to become his bride in the future. The boy himself did not understand what exactly repelled him in this young and weak child. Only the butler's words convinced the heir that the lady truly liked his appearance. But before this, Remdragon had only ever encountered the fear that people felt towards him. No matter how disgusted the heroine was to prove her feelings over and over again, she endured it. The little girl knew that her life depended on her charm, and that's why she smiled sweetly at the Duke. It came as a surprise to her that the guy wanted to continue to always see only a smile on her face. But the lady cried only because Erga frightened her and almost punished her favorite servant. Only the assistants knew exactly how to calm the young lady from the Allergo family. They had noticed more than once that Seafiel was unable to hold back her smile when it came to games. The little girl loved swimming in warm water just as much as she loved going for walks, which relaxed her every time. And only Elton knew that what Seafiel loved most was the comfort from the outside, which the Duke was also supposed to provide. The heroine really expected praise from Ergi, although she understood that he could scold her. But the boy's heart was too kind, so he gently stroked the lady's head. Despite his outward sternness, Remdragon continued to worry about the well-being of his young bride. As a result, the lady was extremely unhappy that her important questions were left unanswered. She took a shower in a daze, as the baby's daily routine required it. Afterwards, Seafiel continued to play with the ball silently, pretending to be happy, and in the end, they even made her drink cocoa before bed, although the lady was too excited. All this led to the fact that the little girl could not fall asleep due to the anger that had taken hold of her. The lady's condition was only alleviated by the fact that the maids remained grateful to her for her protection. The heroine still found it strange that the assistants were so afraid of the heir. But for them, there was no other way out, because Erga seemed practically a god to them. From the Duke's very childhood, the girls took care of him, and therefore saw all the changes well. Dragon children always grew up faster than everyone else, and this left its mark on them. So Erga still did not understand simple things, although complex ones seemed easy to him. It was for this reason that the young man remained close to the lady, while they could have become friends. His heightened senses caused him to fear getting close to other people around him. Seafiel couldn't even imagine what it was like to live with strong emotions and reactions. For some reason, the girl couldn't get the thoughts of the handsome Erg out of her head, but she knew better than anyone that their marriage was just a successful formality, and in the future, Allergo faces loneliness, although she will be freed from the oppression of her family. Even the servants of the Remdragon estate will be forced to follow their masters. The maids clearly didn't expect the lady to suddenly ask questions about their disappearance in the future. They couldn't tell the whole truth to the baby, no matter how much they became attached to her. So the girls tried to give as much care and love to the young lady as possible. It was within their power to make the girl strong enough to live alone. Although the lady initially knew about the disappearance of the Remdragon family, she now felt sad. Somewhere deep down, the heroine prayed that she would not be left alone. The next morning, Seafiel woke up noisily, and therefore very unpleasantly. No matter how hard the lady tried to sleep longer, the maids had a different opinion on this matter. As a result, the baby felt as if she had not slept for several nights in a row. But the assistants still beamed at the sight of the beautiful lady, not paying attention to her mood. All because the Duke allowed the lady to live in the estate until his father and grandfather arrived. But the girl was not happy with this decision, as she had heard a lot about the cruelty of Ergi's parents. But no matter how much the little girl begged to be left in the spare house, it was all useless. The small carriage with her things was already fully prepared by caring maids, while the heroine was afraid that she could easily be thrown out of the house if they saw her. But for some reason, the assistant did not share the lady's fear, although she knew about Ergi's father's character. Instead, the girl believed that they would manage to avoid meeting the eldest duke in time. So even Seafiel's saddest eyes couldn't help her turn the situation to her advantage. The maid was not sensitive to seduction, as she did not pay attention to people, and so the little girl lost the verbal battle before it even began. But the room into which the girl was brought was all aglow with wealth and beauty inside. Seafiel couldn't believe her eyes when she realized that she would actually be living in such a place. So moving to the estate no longer frightened the lady so much, as she loved comfort and coziness. In the past, the heroine was given only hard beds and thin sheets that did not warm her, but now the lady freely enjoyed every touch of the pleasant fabric of the blanket. The heroine immediately guessed that the order for her resettlement clearly came from the heir of the family. So the girl's heart was filled with gratitude to the guy who took care of her. She couldn't even imagine that Erga would personally check how his bride's resettlement went. Seafiel didn't really know how to communicate with the young man after everything that had happened between them. But it turned out that this time the Duke was in a good mood, and he greeted first. What surprised the lady most was that the guy came to her for the first time not empty-handed. The maids could not help but notice this fact, as they always reacted emotionally. They were sure that Erga had brought a gift for the lady to please her, and the boy actually picked up a toy in the shape of a raccoon, which reminded him of Seafiel. But he didn't do it just like that, because he wanted to teach the lady a very important lesson. In front of the girl, the young man tore apart part of the toy to show what would happen if Miss disobeyed. This is how cruelly the Rem Dragon family dealt with all the people they didn't like. Therefore, Erga saw no problem in getting rid of his sweet bride in the future. A cold sweat broke out on the heroine when she realized how strange everyone was in this place. However, the toy was still a gift for the lady, so it was given to her. Tears of pain and resentment inevitably welled up in Seafiel's eyes, because the gift could have been good. Only the heir remained satisfied after this, since he had sufficiently intimidated the lady. But it was not to be, because the little girl had come up with a real plan of revenge for the cruel groom. While the maids were running around for food, the girl had a lot of free time for herself. So Seafiel turned to the notebook in which she wrote down the names of all her offenders. Of course, the assistant did not miss the fact that Miss had written the groom's name in the diary, but she attributed all this to the girl's love interest, since she had no idea about her feelings. The maid always enjoyed watching how people hide what they really think. In fact, the assistant was often visited by sad thoughts during conversations with her sister. They understood that the lady should not see the Duke when he was in a bad mood. The girls were the last succubi in this world, and were preparing to leave for another. But before that moment, the lady suddenly appeared in the estate and became a ray of light for them. And now the maid saw her goal in protecting Seafiel, who was a young and fragile child. No matter how sad the assistant was, she still had to leave this world. But for now, all her thoughts were about making the good and calm days last as long as possible. That evening, the heroine learned that she would not be able to see her heir for some time. The little girl immediately realized that he had begun to change appearance, and was only glad to be separated. The maids always remained near the miss, so she did not feel any loneliness. Of course, Seafiel pretended that she would miss the guy who was supposed to be her fiancé. But in fact, the little girl was only glad that she wouldn't have to communicate with the young man. During his absence, the miss had time to fully get used to life in the beautiful estate. She spent her days bathing in compliments from the servants and did whatever she wanted. But what pleased Seafiel most was that she was given access to a huge library. With her sweet demeanor, the lady quickly charmed even the gloomy cook in this house. That's why he constantly delighted the girl with delicious food that he personally prepared for her. The heroine could never have dreamed of someone taking such good care of her. This time, the cook gave her some beautiful candies in a jar, hoping to improve their relationship. Seafiel had become accustomed to the man's strange character, so she was happy with his gifts. She walked around the streets all day long, finally not worrying about her future at all. But what attracted the ladies most was the knight's flights on wyverns, which they performed every day. Today, the little one was lucky, and one person landed very close to her. The girl couldn't miss this chance because she wanted to ride a wyvern, but she didn't expect that the knight would be so tall and intimidating in appearance. The lady had never before encountered people in this place who did not greet her with a smile. But surprisingly, the stranger still grabbed the girl with him, sharply rising into the air. Seafiel immediately noticed the difference in the flight, although she had only flown with the knights a couple of times before. As always, the entire earth stretched out beneath their feet, and even the estate seemed tiny. But Miss was troubled by the fact that the wyvern's flight this time was significantly different from usual. The man did not miss the fact that the lady suspected him of not being a simple knight. If the little girl knew how dangerous it was for her to talk about this, she would have kept silent until the very end of the flight. But as a result, she ended up even higher above the ground, as if the master was about to throw her off. Only now was Seafiel able to see the face of the man she had asked to give her a ride. His identity was impossible to miss due to his striking resemblance to Irga. This is all because the lady met the Duke of the Daihan estate himself, who was supposed to be away. In such a hopeless situation, in a panic, Miss only screamed louder with joy and fun. The man was noticeably surprised by the fact that the little girl in his arms was displaying miracles of fearlessness. But in reality, the heroine could barely contain herself because she was afraid of dying in just a second. She understood perfectly well that she needed to attract the Duke's attention, if only he would not let her go. That's why Seafiel forced a joyful smile, hoping that it would save her. The heroine's efforts were not in vain, as Daehan became interested in the strange child. Although her plan worked, the little girl herself was ready to die of fear at any moment. Only when they descended to the ground did the lady believe that the danger for her had passed. But the difficulties did not end there, because the Duke wanted to know who the lady he had met was. Of course, he was not aware of what exactly his son's recently chosen bride looked like. Seafiel broke out in a cold sweat as she realized that the man had only accidentally avoided killing her. In fact, the Duke often got rid of people who appeared on his territory. Therefore, it was unusual for him to see that the girl was still following him closely. The assistant, who met the gentleman belatedly, tried to protect the lady. But at that moment, Daehan was in no mood to listen to advice from his loyal servants. It's all because he recently dealt with a man who was trying to get into their territory. The knight didn't expect that there were still fools who wanted to know more about dragons. Remdragon always got incredibly angry because of such situations, because he didn't like killing people. The heroine heard all these conversations clearly, which only made her even more scared. She took advantage of the fact that the assistant had distracted all the tired Duke's attention, and little by little the girl began to retreat back to avoid possible punishment. But everything changed when Seafiel accidentally heard the name of the murdered guy. She never imagined that Roto would follow her from the very moment she escaped from prison. At that moment, the girl felt like she had done everything she could to escape safely, and the lady managed to escape from the surveillance of the guy who constantly pestered her with questions. But the little girl thought that the Allergo family personally dealt with Roto, who betrayed them. Who would have thought that all this time the young man was wandering around in the hope of returning Seafiel? The patch on his clothes confirmed the guy's identity, since he did not change the coat from its owner. So it became clear to Daehan that the Allergo family could very well have sent a spy to them. Even a skilled assistant would never have guessed what goal that man was pursuing. But everything became clear to the heroine, since she knew about the history of her former overseer. So the girl's heart was filled with gratitude to the Duke, who accidentally saved her. She immediately decided to praise him, as this would improve their relationship. And the little girl had with her only a jar of candy, which she had recently received from the cook. It was for this gift that Seafiel confidently called out to the Duke, who had forgotten about her existence. It took all the lady's charm and courage to give the candies to the owner of the estate. In the end, she was pleased that Daehan accepted the sweets from the little girl without a word. Only now did Miss realize that during the recent thunderstorm, she could have seen Roto's shadow outside the window. But at the present time, no dangers were definitely awaiting her on the territory of Remdragon. Seeing such a happy child, the Duke asked himself questions, because usually he was feared. It was strange for him to see a man who not only did not run away, but also gave him something. All the assistants had become accustomed to Sophiel's behavior, which was distinguished by its friendly nature. So they were not surprised that the lady was attracted by the handsome Daihan's appearance. But the lady could not simply leave, as she wanted to consolidate the positive effect. She knew how hard this man tried to grow his strength. So the little girl sincerely called him the strongest, because she was sure of it. And these words touched the very heart of the stern Daihan, who was weak to such compliments. But the lady did not know about this, so she was embarrassed by the Duke's silence, which did not respond to the gift. She was about to get upset when the man suddenly showed attention to her. He didn't often have the opportunity to interact with human children, but he found the lady interesting. It turned out that Erga had always refused his father's love, but the Duke wanted something similar. So the lady had even less reason to fear the owner of the estate. With every word the girl said, Daihan became more and more surprised by her calmness and prudence. Any other child in the lady's place would have long ago run away from such a formidable man. And the assistant clearly saw the tension that was growing between the little girl and the Duke, who was not allowed to kill her. Eventually, Daihan's anger changed to mercy, as he was amazed by the little miss's knowledge about his family. The servant attributed everything to the fact that the girl really liked Erga, which is why she studied every detail about him. But the heroine herself didn't think that people from the outside perceived her so strangely. However, all this was enough to temporarily leave Sophiel, who lived in the estate, alone. Only the maids knew how zealous the Duke was about his orders, so they hastened to take the lady away. All because Daihan clearly remembered how he ordered the girl to be placed in a separate estate. The knight had to bear the full wrath of the master, whose order was disobeyed by everyone in the estate. The servants found themselves in an awkward situation, as Sophiel had moved out of the separate mansion. As soon as the Duke heard about this, he realized that the young man was deliberately trying to get on his nerves. Even now, the heir watched from the window at his father, with whom he had a strained relationship. Daihan didn't want to quarrel with his son now, so for now he left everything as it was at that moment. Thus, Sophiel miraculously escaped reprisal, although she herself did not suspect the Duke's mercy. The little girl acted wisely and did not tell Daihan her last name, which the man hated when they met. The lady herself would gladly have given up her family, in which everyone around her only offended her. Therefore, the girl had no desire to talk about the fact that she was allergic, which reassured the maid. All the servants knew very well how deep was the Duke's hatred for the opposing family. But in her past life, the heroine never had time to find out why Remdragon treated Allergo this way. This whole story began many years ago, when the Remdragons were still ruled by the capable Cherno. He set himself the goal of ridding this world of demons that constantly attacked people. It was for this that he sacrificed many of his soldiers, and his efforts were rewarded. The other three families now known also joined Remdragon's battle against the demons. But after the victory, the Allergos wanted more for themselves. The liberation of the lands was not enough for them. During the general vote, each of the four families will nominate a candidate for the leading role. Cherno wished for equality for all, so that people could live in peace with each other for many centuries. But Allegro's descendant was too greedy to hand over the reins to anyone else. That is why his generation hid gifted children from their family in a dungeon for many years in a row. Until now, the dragons were angry because the Allergos refused to fulfill all their promises. It was unclear to Sophiel why Remdragon didn't deal with her family, since they were stronger. It turned out that the whole thing was about the peace agreement that Cherno had once signed, and he had been deceived. Moreover, their family was about to leave this world soon, something that the maid could not be told about. But even without an assistant, the heroine knew perfectly well about the dragon's intentions to leave the human world. It remained to be seen how soon after this, the Allergo family would be attacked by everyone else. But the girl did not want to fill the little child's head with such unpleasant complications. In fact, Sophiel understood everything perfectly well, but stubbornly remained silent about her knowledge in front of other people. But the maid had no idea about this, so she advised the lady to stay away from the dragons. In her past life, Sophiel studied extensively the history and habits of dragons that were in human form. It was the books that told the girl that representatives of the Remdragon clan do not need to lie at all. The lady was only interested in whether Daihan had been a dragon from birth, or whether the process had happened somehow differently. Although the maid was surprised by the little girl's knowledge, she explained that at first all dragons were people, so the young duke would also show dragon traits much later, since he was still young. For a dragon to grow up properly, it always needed good influence from the outside. Because this process was complex, Seafiel was sure that it was precisely because of this difficult period that the young man constantly ignored her. But the assistant believed that in fact, the young groom did not want to offend his little bride. The maid could talk for hours about what a good man the heir was. But Seafiel wanted to get started with her plans as soon as possible, instead of listening about Ergu. Inside the little girl, everything was burning with the desire to achieve justice with the help of a list of names. But even in such a fiery situation, the lady was not ready to give up delicious desserts. The best delicacies from the cook always warmed her soul, especially after many years of imprisonment in the dungeon. So, every time, Alurgo's daughter chose a snack, forgetting about her important plans. Unfortunately for the girl, it was at this moment that Duke Remdragon learned that she was from the family of his enemies. The man would never in his life allow himself to get involved with these people who cruelly offended his ancestors. But many in the estate had already seen how different the girl was from the greedy Alurgos. However, no words could make Daihan calm down after he learned the truth about Seafiel. Seeing the master's anger, the assistant struggled to find the right words. But at that moment, the owner of the estate was not ready to accept advice, even from those closest to him. What scared the knight most was that Daihan decided to deal with the young lady personally. Remdragon stopped at nothing when it came to taking revenge on his opponents. But this time, he was curious why even the butler was so insistent on keeping Seafiel alive. The Duke's curiosity proved stronger than his desire to take revenge on the daughter of his enemies. It turned out that Elton couldn't allow the baby, who always went to bed on schedule, to be woken up. It was for this reason that everyone in the estate tried not to disturb the lady during her deep sleep. Daihan's reaction was predictable, as he used his abilities to intimidate. The butler was horrified every time he saw his master's powers in action. But during all this time, the assistant had become accustomed to the fact that Daihan had an explosive character. It was time to reveal to the Duke the truth that Seafiel had little regard for her family. After all, the man had no idea what position the little girl occupied in her family, while the lady did not get anything good, as she lived in a cold dungeon. Although Seafiel was indeed listed in the Alurgo family registry, there was nothing else about her. This information greatly surprised the Duke and made him treat the young girl differently. The man could never pass by people who were being offended by someone stronger and more influential. None of the assistants had an answer to the question of why the baby was treated so cruelly. The butler had reason to be proud of Seafiel, who easily adapted to circumstances. So Elton tried his best to make sure that the owner gave the lady another chance. Circumstances developed in such a way that the man managed to become somewhat attached to the girl, who was not afraid of him. What he remembered most was the gift from Seafiel, who had recently proudly presented the Duke with candy. Sympathy for the lady penetrated Daihan's heart, so he could not mercilessly drive her back. Even the assistants couldn't take their eyes off Seafiel, who was always delighting them with something. The owner of the estate had no idea how much Seafiel had managed to charm everyone around her. After all, even the usually calm Elton considered the girl beautiful and sweet, which is why he wished her a good life. The last thing the man expected was to hear that everyone liked the little girl because of her character and appearance. From now on, he was going to personally ensure that the lady did not need anything after the dungeon. Elton had not yet realized that his master actually treated the miss well, despite her last name. He knew that Seafiel and Ergi's wedding would not happen anytime soon, so the lady was harmless. For this reason, the butler tried to prove to the owner that there was no need to keep such a close eye on the lady. Until the very end, the Duke did not want to admit that he, too, had been enchanted by the lady who had run away from her family. Who would have thought that the heroine would attract the attention of even such a gloomy and serious person? None of the assistants dared to ask more questions, just so that Daihan would not change his mind. Meanwhile, Seafiel was looking for Elton all over the estate, as she had questions about the dragons. The girl was always distinguished by such a strong curiosity that she was constantly looking for answers to questions, so she couldn't help herself when she heard one of the maids talking about her outside the door. Alurgo was so lost in thought that she didn't immediately notice how the butler suddenly appeared right next to her. Elton rushed to meet the baby immediately after he finished talking to the stubborn Duke. As soon as he heard that the lady had questions, the guy prepared to answer them seriously. The heroine remembered the advice from the maid that only Elton could find the answer to even the most difficult question. Until now, the little girl was amazed by thoughts about how long dragons and their helpers could live. It was because of the magic in his body that Elton could do many times more than any human butler. But the talkative assistant still needed to be brought to the necessary topic of conversation. In the end, the little girl didn't have time to ask anything before the guy remembered an important document for her. Seafiel was still wary of any papers that might record her life. But it turned out that in just a couple of days, Elton had prepared all the information about the lady's dowry on their part. The heroine's eyes lit up with greed at the sight of the wealth that would go only to her family. Only now did the girl remember that not everything was so simple with the wedding of the heir of Remdragon. In a past life, many aristocrats began to fight among themselves for the right to be close, and all because of the huge dowry that the dragons were ready to give to any person. Human greed was so great that the aristocrats could not stop arguing and quarreling. They all forgot that the Remdragon family was actually more of a predatory family. The heroine was still afraid for herself, because in her past life, Vitego's father initially did not pay attention to her, and the little girl spent a lot of time alone, trying to understand why she had been given such a life. But everything changed when Allergo learned about his daughter's amazing mental abilities. However, Seafiel's joy was premature, because the man was simply using her. And now, the lady would not like to allow a repetition of history that led her to a cruel and painful death. That's why Miss was so interested in the question of whether Elton had contacted her family. It turned out that the butler had even sent several letters, but none of them received a response. But the guy wasn't worried, because formally, they only needed to send wealth to the stubborn Allergos. The curiosity inside the little girl was so great that she could not resist looking at all the treasures. The incredible wealth instantly blinded the girl, who did not want to give it all away. Elton had foreseen everything in advance and installed magic on the box so that no one could steal the money. Of course, the little girl was allowed to touch the treasures, since the guy trusted her completely. But for the heroine, the problem was not even this, because she considered such a dowry to be enormous. Seafiel would gladly take everything for herself, just so she wouldn't have to give anything to her greedy relatives. But Elton was used to always observing rules and customs, which is why he collected such a good dowry. The butler was glad that the girl's family could still be proud of her achievements, but the lady herself did not share the butler's feelings, which, in her opinion, only made everything much worse. Seafiel was ready to kill the assistant, if only he would not send money to her previous home. At that very moment, the man received a message from Allergo, which only now reached the boy. He read the response to the wedding invitation with interest, since this was the most exciting question. But the butler's face quickly changed as soon as he learned the contents of this letter from Allergo. The heroine noticed this, so she immediately made sure that the guy gave her this piece of paper from his father. The little girl understood perfectly well that nothing good could be expected from Vitego. It was not for nothing that they called him evil. But the lady could not even imagine that she would ultimately be deprived of all finances and denied close relationships. The next morning, it became known that Father Seafiel had sent someone to sort things out, and the girl was ready to greet with a warlike look any guest who came to them. To make sure everything went well, she put on a ring enchanted by magicians for great luck. Secretly, the little girl hoped that the dragons would cover her if an unknown person suddenly attacked. And soon the carriage from the Allergo family arrived, bringing with it that very guest from the little girl's family. It turned out to be Madame Erarta, who had the most harmful and cruel character of the whole family. The heroine could not even imagine that her father would send this particular woman, who became her adoptive mother. This lady never showed a drop of sympathy for the girl, at whose expense she boosted her ego. She was able to take a place in the palace only because she became pregnant by Vitego and gave birth to his son. But Allergo's first wife still didn't love Erarta, even though they were supposed to work together. Instead, there were often unpleasant conversations between the women as they struggled for power. Only Erarta eventually managed to give birth to a son, which further strengthened her position in the estate. But every time Allergo's first wife scolded her, Madame would inevitably take it out on Seafiel. This is how the lady accidentally learned that her mother, named Lilia, died of weakness immediately after giving birth. So in that damn family, no one gave the little girl love, so she didn't want to go back there. The maid was well aware of her mistress's mood, so she boldly shielded her from the woman. But all this did not stop Allergo from behaving extremely arrogantly, demanding respect for himself. While she did not show even a little bit of politeness towards the assistant and the lady, but the heroine didn't believe a single word of the madam, who always only created the illusion of care. Contrary to the little girl's wishes, Irarta tried to get closer to her, as if she had truly always loved her. But the madam was so angry that she whispered to the lady that she would be dealt with cruelly for her escape to this family. In the past, Seafiel would have been frightened by such threatening words, but after death, she changed dramatically. So she was not afraid of the vile words of her aunt, who never even tried to become a mother to her. Miss deliberately turned on the acting to show how Madam mocked her in the dungeon. The girl was sure that now the woman would have nothing to oppose her with on foreign territory. So, no matter how hard Allergo tried, her words could no longer frighten the girl, who had become bolder. But suddenly, something happened that the heroine could not have foreseen. It turned out that the young duke had gone out for a walk and had even taken his beloved pet with him. Seafiel immediately felt a chill, as the boy was clearly not in a very good mood. Erga was indeed angry, because he heard the screams when he just wanted to walk in silence. The maid also quickly realized what a dangerous situation their noisy guest had gotten herself into. The young heir always treated people he didn't know well, and today he wasn't in the mood. So Seafiel could only watch the young man warily, observing his actions. She didn't want to take the blame for the noise, because then she would definitely deserve an unpleasant punishment. Instead, the little girl reminded the duke that the guest did not know the rules of conduct on the estate. Irarta behaved so brazenly only because she was confident in her own immunity. But any person was an empty sound for the stubborn Ergi, because he only cared about his own family. So the guy was quite ready to kill the unpleasant woman, especially because she was from the Allergo family. The heroine realized too late that the young man was not joking when he threatened to take the madame's life. But his panther immediately perceived his master's words as an order to commit cruel and terrible acts. Only Seafiel's proactive actions stopped the animal from attacking Madame right then and there. Luckily for the lady, a patrol happened to be flying by at that very moment, so the Duke was temporarily stopped. A little later, the maid took the girl to her room, since it was not she who had to deal with the impudent Irarta. The assistant felt sorry for the little girl, who had been subjected to cruelty at the hands of a woman all her life. But the lady had experienced even more terrible events in the past, so she perceived everything with a positive attitude. The girl wanted to support the lady who behaved so bravely next to her constant offender. As soon as the maid left to get food, the previously confident smile slowly slid off Seafiel's face. The heroine understood that she could not leave Irarta's appearance in this estate to chance. Meanwhile, the woman hoped to meet the owner of the Remdragon estate as soon as possible. She was prepared to wait a while before they began a serious conversation. But Irarta didn't expect that the man would ignore her expectations, thereby causing anger within the madam. Only the maids who arrived with the mistress stopped her from behaving unruly on foreign territory. This is because the woman initially planned to throw away all the dowry that was going to be given to their family. Next, she needed to anger the Duke as much as possible, since he already didn't like their family. Irarta planned to carry out all these actions in order to break off Seafiel's engagement with Erga. Madame was not used to stopping before her goals, no matter how difficult they were, and the maid knew about this peculiarity of the woman, that she always took over Vitego's plans for herself. Madame suffered from narcissism, which is why she loved her personality so much and did not accept criticism from others. But no one cared about the delicate feelings of the guest, whom they had made wait for so long. Allergo's nerves were ready to give out at any moment due to the fact that she was shown so much disrespect. The only thing that calmed her down was that Elton politely addressed the guest who had been waiting for his master for so long. Irarta's mission was so important to her that Madame did not allow herself to think that she could fail. The woman's persistence bore fruit, because soon the Duke finally came to meet her. True, Daihan did not want to drag out the conversation for too long, as he was very tired. Allergo's wife didn't expect that any man would dare not pay due attention to her, but the list of dowry that Remdragon gave her silenced the lady for a while. She had no idea that this family had promised so many treasures to her family in exchange for a wedding with Seafiel. But Irarta would not have become Allergo's wife if she had not known how to bargain with people in such situations. But she didn't expect that, in exchange for doubling her wealth, Daihan asked her to name the baby. The whole point was that Madame never thought about the name of the girl whom everyone disliked, so the woman lost the bet even before she started to brazenly bargain with the real dragon. Although the Duke did not seem very strong in appearance, he defeated a large number of enemies during his life. Therefore, the man did not believe that this lady cared about the girl who had run away from home. No matter what beautiful words Irarta spoke now, they no longer had any effect on the owner of the estate. Daihan was inclined to believe his assistants, who had learned of Sifil's terrible condition in the dungeon. So he didn't care that in the empire the Allergo family was closest to the ruler of this country. Remdragon had long since disdained everyone in the Allergo family who had once cruelly betrayed his relative. While Irarta tried to insist that she needed to take Sifil and personally teach her everything, although even the butler knew that the Remdragon family was able to provide a good education, these words angered the Duke most of all, as he did not like it when his dignity was belittled. From such a look of the man, the woman's whole body seemed to be frozen with fear and hostility inside. The woman could not even imagine that it would be so difficult for her to deal with Duke Remdragon. The best option for her was to escape, preferably with the documents about the gifted treasures. Daihan was so fed up with this aristocrat that he wouldn't mind throwing her out with the contract right now. And at that moment, Irarta shared the Duke's desire, since with every second he frightened her more and more. Who would have thought that Madame would have problems taking the dowry with her? It turned out that there were no documents in the box, but only notes from Sifil. Naturally, everyone in the estate immediately tried to return what the little girl had taken with her for some reason. Moreover, this happened so unnoticed that the maids did not see the actions of the young mistress. The heroine did not plan to hide the fact that she had taken the documents, but she also did not want to give them back. The whole point was that she had important information for the Duke, but the lady did not have time to tell it. All this time, the heroine knew from her past life that her aunt was secretly mining magic stones in the mine. She used lands that were located far from all other extractive resources. It was from this secret activity that the woman acquired many magical stones for sale. The Duke could not ignore such a fact, since he himself had just almost given Irarta another mine. It was not surprising that the woman began to deny her participation and guilt in such matters. If it weren't for the little girl, no one from the estate would have been able to find out what Madame had so carefully hidden. But the lady knew about this from a past life, and that is why she insisted that nothing could be given to a woman. The girl's behavior alarmed the butler, because the lady rarely showed emotions in public. Elton was familiar with the names of the mines that had supposedly been robbed by Irarta with the help of other people's hands. The guy knew geography well, so he remembered that several other mines were located near that one. This is exactly the conclusion the heroine had been waiting for all this time from her assistant, whose genius she had never doubted. All this meant that Irarta could easily deceive a large number of people at once, so the woman had to be captured immediately in order to better investigate everything that was happening. In such situations, the Duke was not used to hesitating, since his life could very well depend on it. Therefore, Irarta was no longer perceived as a guest in the estate, since she had been caught breaking the laws. From that moment on, Daihan was free to do whatever he wanted with the criminal who had fallen into his hands. However, even after this, the owner of the estate was unable to get back the lands that had been given to him, because the little girl handed out papers to the assistants who had been working hard for her lately. The servants were even more delighted by such good deeds, because no one had ever rewarded them before. The Duke could not ignore the fact that the little girl had done him a good service. In fact, he himself did not want to give the dowry to anyone from the opposing Allergo family. Only the attentive Elton noticed that for the first time in a long time, the gentleman did not hide his smile. But before, Daihan always tried to maintain a calm expression on his face, imagining himself to be a dragon. But this time, the man even personally picked up the girl in his arms to carry her to the room. He was so engrossed in the little girl that he didn't notice a tall, masculine figure appearing behind him. While the assistants immediately recognized this man as the first lord of the Remdragon clan. As a dragon, he could live for many centuries, so he made full use of this skill and appeared unexpectedly, while the heroine for some reason could not cope with the tears in her eyes. No matter how much the maid tried to calm her down, none of this was able to help the young girl. But what bothered Miss most was the Duke, who for some reason did not leave her room. And it turned out that Sifil had good reason to worry, because he became interested in how she found out about the mines. The whole point was that Irarta used the territory of the Remdragon clan to extract stones. But in this case, Sifil came up with an excuse for herself, because the lady was wearing a lunarite ring on her hand. And this material was a derivative only of magical stones, and was obtained only in mines. That's how easily the heroine got out of the situation, although in fact, she still knew everything from her past life. It turned out that Daihan had no intention of simply letting go of the woman who had foolishly fallen into his power. The girl should have guessed right away that everyone in this estate had a slightly strange personality, but what scared the little girl most was that even her maids were not so harmless. They were the ones who most often carried out interrogations. Since the succubi were excellent at it, goosebumps of fear ran all over the lady's body because she could not disappoint these people. Until now, the assistants sent only good and pleasant dreams to the baby, which they fed on, and it cost the girls nothing to show a bad dream to a sleeping person, which is what they were going to do with Irarta. But there was no more time for talking, because the lady had accidentally missed her afternoon nap, and it was time for her to sleep. The maid performed her duties so well that she strictly monitored the observance of the regime. But for some reason, the Duke still remained in the baby's room, although she had been barely keeping her eyes open for a long time. Thoughts about the girl still wouldn't leave Daihan's head, and he wanted to get answers to his questions. In such a sleepy state, the heroine could tell the whole truth, so she honestly admitted that she did not love her family. Most of all, the lady dreamed of immersing her relatives in all the pain that she experienced in her past life. Dragons were always good at recognizing the truth, so Daihan saw that the little girl was not lying to him. These answers only added more questions to the man's head, but he no longer dared to ask the sleeping lady. Instead, the Duke swore to himself that he would definitely take revenge for all the torment the girl had suffered in her own family. As usual, Elton was waiting for the gentleman not far away, since his help could be needed at any moment. So the butler immediately noticed that the master's mood had worsened significantly after communicating with the lady. The assistant was sure that Daihan had become much more attached to the baby than he admitted, while the man himself thought that he simply considered Sifil an interesting and mischievous child. In fact, it was not without reason that he invited Elton to his office, since he could boast of first-class legal knowledge. From now on, Daihan was going to do everything possible to defeat the cruel Allergo. And to begin with, that night, he sent into the dungeon precisely the maids who belonged to the succubi. The girls were only too happy to help the gentleman, since they did not like this woman at the very beginning. Although the sisters were slightly different in character, neither of them was going to show an ounce of pity. So today, Irarta faced a stormy night, full of bloody nightmares and painful details. After everything this woman had done to Sifil, the maids had no intention of being gentler in their interrogation of her. So, the very next morning, the heroine learned that Allergo's wife had confessed to all her crimes. The heroine had no doubt that now her father would be forced to act quickly. All his life, Vitego tried only for the sake of his sons, and he didn't give a damn about his daughter and wives. So now that Irarta had accidentally exposed herself to attack, she was no longer of use to this man. Therefore, the woman no longer had the protection of Allergo, which had previously remained on her side for her own benefit. Naturally, Vitego was quickly informed about the situation with Irarta, whom he sent to the estate. The man, as expected, became furious that his wife couldn't cope with even such a simple task. From now on, he no longer needed her, so he asked his assistant to file for divorce. Allergo was sure that only such actions could save him from the shame caused by his young wife's actions. The servant always obeyed his master without question, so this time he did not ask any questions. Only Irarta's son was dissatisfied with his father's decision, but he had no power to resist. Misfortunes never come alone, so soon the herald burst into the office of the grumpy Allergo. The man did not expect that now he too would be accused of stealing magical stones from abandoned mines. Even the most skilled assistants couldn't sort out these rumors, so they had to accept it. But Vitego could not forgive Irarta for telling about all his documents just to save herself. In fact, the maids did not torment the woman with nightmares for several nights in a row. She was already so impressionable that she was frightened by their mere appearance in the dungeon. But this time, the heroine came with her assistants, as she had a conversation with her fake mother. The girl had no doubt that her father would not even try to rescue his wife from captivity, while Irarta, until the very end, hoped for her husband, who had previously promised her many good things, but only the heroine knew how cruel a person her father was, and he did not change at all. So the aristocrat was faced only with the cold of prison and cruel punishment from Duke Remdragon. In fact, the little girl didn't just come to her aunt, whom she would prefer not to see for a long time. She brought with her the very same ledger from which she had taken information about her father's cunning dealings. The lady had filled out a similar document herself in the past, so she easily copied it from memory. Seafiel had no doubt that upon seeing these papers, Irarta would want to act to protect itself. And the little girl guessed correctly, as the woman asked her to send only one letter to the address. And so the lady came to the point of delight in defeating yet another person from her book of revenge. The heroine could not help but rejoice that she was gradually getting closer to her goal. Meanwhile, the Duke listened to stupid apologies from the servants of the Allergo family. The man noticed that this letter also did not mention the name of the girl who ran away from her father. Therefore, he again did not accept the peace offer, which seemed to him false and insincere. Daihan was ready to talk only if Vitego approached him personally. Until then, the Duke took care of the girl, who had become practically like his own daughter to him. The little girl did not expect that the visits from the owner of the estate would increase noticeably lately. The man was haunted by the thought that Seafiel had also had a hand in exposing Irarta. No matter how desperately the lady tried to divert suspicion from herself, it was useless. Daihan already believed that the girl had thought through much of what happened to them in advance. If Seafiel hadn't immediately come up with something to divert attention, the Duke's suspicions would have increased. So the little girl complimented Daihan, comparing his strength to that of a huge sea whale. The man was easily swayed by pleasant words every time, since he was weak to any compliments. Miss had no idea how much she had managed to attach herself to this stern man. Despite the fact that the girl had disposed of the dowry, the Duke was not angry with her for this act. On the contrary, he was proud of the little girl who behaved so wisely while she was still young. But the girl attracted Daihan's attention from the very beginning, with the confidence that shone through in her every word. It's true that now the little girl almost burst into tears of joy at the manifestation of feelings. She really tried hard to help the Remdragon family, which she wanted to belong to, and the heroine's efforts were not in vain, since the Duke was ready to accept her into his family in the future. The man would have been glad if Seafiel had later started calling him the father he had replaced for her. After the wedding of a girl and a boy, the baby will become related to the entire family, so the attitude towards her will change. Previously, the heroine could not even dream of having a real and loving family, and now the future promised to be even more wonderful. Despite the little raccoon's nickname for the lady, the Duke was not joking when he told the little girl about the future, where he saw her next to him and his son. The only thing he couldn't understand was why Elton had limited the circle of the girl who wanted to walk as much as possible. Of course, there was even a garden on the estate grounds, but it belonged to the late Duchess and was therefore empty. Until now, Daihan remembered with pain in his heart the day when he lost his beloved wife to illness. That night, he spent the entire time at the woman's bedside, but his presence did nothing to ease her condition. At that moment, the Duke most of all regretted that he was a dragon and not a magical healer from another world. But the woman died, and from that moment on, there was no one to visit her beautiful garden every day. Elton was still sad about this, because before he liked everything in that neat place. Although it was still difficult for the Duke to say goodbye to his beloved, he understood that he had to move on. The garden was getting worse every year, so soon it would be impossible to save it. That's why Daihan gave this garden to the little girl, who rejoiced at every flower on the estate's territory. That's how it all came to the point that the little one had such a wonderful place to spend time. She could lie for hours on the grass under the blue sky, enjoying the views with great pleasure. The girl behaved so quietly that the maids sometimes even lost sight of her, which made them worry. The lady was completely satisfied with her current life, which was accompanied by an absence of problems. Only recently, the girl had been less and less able to talk to the Duke, whom she liked. It turned out that today, the man had only come to say goodbye, as he was leaving the estate. But Seafiel had already become attached to the dragon, even though his appearance could have frightened anyone. However, Miss wanted them to see each other as soon as possible. Otherwise, she would miss him. Daihan was pleased to realize that in a short time, he had managed to please this sweet little girl. He was a little sad to leave the lady with his son, who had been having fits due to illness. The heroine knew about Ergi's difficult period, which gradually took on the form of a dragon instead of a human one. And on this path, even a father could not help his son, since each member of their family must go through this on their own. But the man was able to find a good teacher for Seafiel, since Miss is now in trouble without an education. The maid was most delighted with this opportunity, since the Duke had not helped people before. And now he not only let the girl into the garden, which had been closed for a long time, but also thought about her upbringing. The heroine herself had no idea how much she had changed Daehan since her appearance. But the maid, who had known the master well, almost since childhood, noticed this perfectly. The assistant was delighted that the lady was able to gain the favor of almost everyone in the family. Even the servants fell in love with the little girl, who amazed everyone with her kindness and decency. This made the maid sad to think about the future, in which all the members of the Remdragon estate would leave this world. Now, there are only 2 succubi left here, who were sisters from birth and took care of each other. Many years ago, their relatives left this world, and they plan to follow them. When the blue moon comes, all the entities in the estate will leave this world through the open doors. And the heroine understood that there would be no place for her next to her friends when they decided to go to their own. No matter how sad the maid was, she dreamed all her life of seeing her parents again. The hardest thing for Seafiel was that no one knew exactly when the gates to another world would open. The assistant couldn't hide the sadness that appeared on the girl's face after such conversations. She tried her best to support the little girl so that she would not think about a future in which she would be left alone. But it was clear from the girl that words alone were not enough to completely drive away her sadness. Then the maid came up with another way and gave the lady a beautiful ring with protective properties. Seafiel immediately appreciated one of the few gifts she had received in both her lives. In fact, this ring had powerful magic that was able to inform about danger to the miss. The assistant wanted to be absolutely sure that nothing bad would happen to the lady. Allergo gratefully accepted the gift, which surprisingly fit her perfectly. The girl had no idea that she would be in a good mood, not only because of the owner of the estate. To thank her assistant for her care, the lady went in search of herbs. The little girl needed a specific flower with which she could make a delicious infusion. But searching for it always took a long time, because the plant rarely grew in these remote places. Seafiel was in such a hurry for the surprise that she lost her footing and fell all over the ground. Tears of resentment and confusion appeared on the girl's face, as she did not expect such a trick from her body. But what surprised Seafiel most was that the young heir of the family appeared right next to her. Miss was not prepared for such a meeting, because the young man was often in a bad mood for communication. But it turned out that this time, the guy was only making a few barbs at the future bride. But this was enough for the little girl to once again understand how harmful her fiancé was. Erga had only partially heard the gossip about the exploits of Seafiel, who had managed to deprive her family of their dowry. Unlike the guy, the lady did not want to discuss her actions, which went beyond what was permitted. She was much more interested in whether the young duke really lived in a treehouse nearby. During all her walks, this was the first time the little girl had come across this house, but she was already delighted. The boy did not miss the lady's desire to get inside, which was typical of any curious child. But the heroine knew that Erga was always reluctant to share his secret places with others. But this time, the girl was lucky, since Remdragon himself wanted to communicate with at least someone. The house inside looked even better than the heroine's wildest dreams of such a place for herself. But the delight was outweighed by embarrassment from the fact that the lady expected a trick from the explosive young man. Although the young man had behaved calmly up until now, he still couldn't resist giving advice to his future bride. The heroine did not expect that the guy would suddenly ask her not to trust his father so much, who was known for his cruelty. Miss herself knew what the Duke was like in action, but for some reason he did not show her his bad sides. So, such wariness of the son towards his father only made the lady think more about their relationship. Although Daehan tried to make his son's life as easy as possible, it didn't seem like Erga was drawn to him. For this reason, the heroine considered it right to also avoid the young man, who caused her doubts. But before Seafiel could take even a couple of steps towards the door, Erga stopped her with his words. Although the heroine was already living a second life, she still felt stupid next to the heir of the family. The guy's presence felt like a strong pressure from the side, although he was just looking at the baby. Erga could not understand why the lady avoided him if she had so wanted to marry him before. Seafiel had only a few seconds to come up with a worthy and logical answer. So she remembered that her family was not going to give a dowry, which made her unworthy of marriage. In fact, this was only an indirect reason, but the heroine hoped that it would save her. Today, Erga was all kindness, so he even consoled the girl who was worried about her poverty. He calmly explained that she was already a good gift from the Allergo family, so nothing more was needed. Although the heir spent most of his time alone, he could not help but think about the lady. This is how the heroine's herbal expedition ended, as a result of which she did not collect a single plant. Until now, Seafiel found Urgi's behavior strange, as he was sometimes cold and sometimes warm towards her. It turned out that all this time, the maids had been desperately searching for the young mistress throughout the estate, all because the first duke of the family finally deigned to announce his arrival home. The heroine knew only a little about this dragon, who was the first to fight against her family. Cherno always achieved the highest statuses because he honed his skills so well, so the little girl's first desire was to hide as far as possible from such a stern adult. But it turned out that the duke wanted to see the girl who was supposed to become part of his family after the wedding. And so, from a conversation with one Remdragon, the lady accidentally moved on to communicating with another member of the clan. From the very beginning, the man was wary of the girl, who was the daughter of his longtime enemy. He knew well that her appearance was a sign of an unusual blood mixture in the past. This is because Seafiel received her abilities due to the fact that she had part of the demon's powers within her. It was this dragon who hated the creatures from hell that he banished more than the Allergo family. So the heroine found herself in a very bad situation because no one could protect her at that moment. Right now, the leadership of the conversation was not assigned to her, so everything depended on the decision of the eldest duke. It turned out that the man was in a good mood today, as he considered the lady's appearance to be a coincidence. So the little girl was able to breathe a sigh of relief when she realized that Cherno was in a good mood. What impressed the man most was that the lady herself took revenge on the family by depriving them of their dowry. This moment still echoed with awkwardness in the girl's heart, and she didn't want to discuss it. So she herself changed the subject to the fact that Cherno did not look like a perennial dragon at all. As soon as the miss gave him many compliments, the man's face blossomed, because he really did look young. He was not used to people honestly telling him what they thought, since many were afraid to do so. But the heroine has learned over the course of her 2 lives that it's always better to be honest with dragons, as they'll like her more that way. Her open gaze left Cherno with no doubt that Seafiel was not hiding anything from him. Since the girl did not look like Vitego, the man assumed that she resembled her mother. But the heroine never saw the woman who gave her a name and life in this difficult world. The dragon was not embarrassed, as he was used to the constant losses among people who lived only a century. The duke was pleased with the girl's honesty, so much so that she had no idea how old he really was. Only from the butler did the little girl learn that not long ago, Cherno had already entered his 4th century of life in this world. But it seemed to the lady that the dragon was not much older than Dahan, who was his son. For some reason, the elder duke decided to prove the baby wrong and asked for a magic mirror. Only in it was the true form of the man visible, whose appearance was constantly hidden by magic. But even so, Seafiel saw in the mirror not a very old man, but just a pleasant uncle. Before, she had no idea that there were objects that could dispel dragon spells. Because the Rem dragons had kept a low profile for so long, little was known about their lineage. As a result, the heroine accidentally called Cherno a grandfather, since that is essentially what he was. This circumstance made not only the head laugh, but also Elton, who noticed the gentleman's disposition. While Seafiel was worried that she had addressed the ruler of the clan too informally. But at that moment, business representatives entered the room and saved the lady from embarrassment. The lady was not very surprised, as she had already heard about the duke's desire to deal with finance. The maids even managed to warn the little girl about this before her meeting with the first ruler of the family. The assistant explained that each of the Rem dragons has been doing something they love since childhood. This was necessary to prevent the enormous energy within the dragons from gradually fading away. That's why Daihan put so much effort into fencing, which brought him pleasure and joy. The man even went so far as to collect a lot of documents about his remarkable skills. While it was known about Cherno that he was constantly trying his hand at trading ventures, but in her past life, the lady had never heard of a man succeeding in even one thing, so she didn't place much hope on his cooperation with humans, although she was curious. What surprised the little girl most was that the duke calmly paid with jewelry. Moreover, the emblem on the chest reminded the heroine of something from her past life that concerned dragons. At that time, there were a lot of rumors about an organization that was simply investing in various things, but was suffering losses. Each time, experts could not explain where this organization still had money from. Only now did Seafiel learn that this guild had been led all this time by the business-minded Cherno. This fact explained to Miss why the organization continued to invest in unsuitable matters. It was only by chance that the little girl heard that the Duke had already planned his next real estate deal. The heroine remembered well that after this case, Cherno had to close his business forever due to the loss of money. All because there was a cunning man involved in it, belonging to the huge Allergo family. So Seafiel felt it was her duty to prevent the first head from making such a terrible mistake. The only problem was that Cherno was already leaving for this important matter the next day. So the lady had to use all her charm to get taken on a long trip. But the man had not initially planned to take the baby with him, and therefore had no intention of changing his mind. However, this time, lives depended on his decisions, so the heroine could not give in. For the first time in his life, Elton saw the young lady being so capricious in front of people around her. The baby seemed to have been completely replaced, as she clung to the Duke with all her arms and legs. Cherno was clearly embarrassed by such pressure, since the children had not shown any interest in him before. Curiosity was stronger inside Remdragon, so he tried to find out why Miss was acting like this. But Seafiel didn't have time to come up with any excuse, because the truth was too complicated. The lady was saved by Cherno's handsome face, so she said that she wished to follow only him everywhere. The butler immediately supported this theory, since the little girl had already spoken about her love for beauty. Although the lady usually didn't like Elton's advertising, now it was only a plus for her. What Cherno liked most was that the girl wanted to call him her grandfather. If she wanted, the lady was good at coming up with many compliments for any creature in the world. Therefore, the Duke immediately melted from such pressure, because he was as proud as Daihan. This is how the heroine secured the opportunity to travel with Cherno in order to save him from failure. The little girl was delighted with the upcoming trip, also because she loved to travel. But this did not stop her from staying focused, because the matter ahead was quite serious. The lady remembered well that the whole scam had taken place in this very city where they had arrived. In appearance, it was no different from the other cities in which Cherno tried to do business. But this place will become a turning point in the Duke's career, as it will destroy his entire life and status. This dragon was too kind and trusting when it came to advice from people. For this reason, he fell for the deception and bought a huge territory, which was in fact deserted. Until now, the heroine hasn't figured out how to communicate with the self-confident ruler of the Remdragon clan. Although Cherno's assistants were everywhere, they were unable to save him from terrible business mistakes. The servants merely provided the master with information, and he then decided what to do with it. And now, an assistant named Noel has discovered that a gate has recently appeared in the quiet village. The little girl was forced to pretend that she didn't understand at all what exactly was being talked about. Noel turned out to be as talkative as the Duke, so together they told the girl everything. He had long since learned that an entire district near the most famous and richest city in the empire was for sale. Even a child could see that this was the most advantageous offer among all possible ones. Noel had long noticed interest among the aristocrats who were desperately competing for that territory. This new place was planned to be connected with all other cities by means of transport. A project was already planned to build a large number of places to attract people, and in general, they wanted to make that territory look like a real city, only on a smaller scale. And only one heroine knew that nothing could really come of that place, but she wasn't against walking with her grandfather through all the places in the city that promised to become a prototype. While the adults were having fun, the lady was carefully studying the people around her. Her suspicions grew stronger with each person who acted noisily, as if trying to attract attention. The heroine was most afraid that Cherno would already line up to buy the empty territories. But for some reason, the lady did not notice the interest in the faces of the adults who would like to acquire land. Only later did Noel admit to the little girl that he had thought of everything in advance to save the Duke from problems. So now Cherno didn't have to stand in line, because his assistant had already negotiated the deal. One aristocrat promised to buy the land instead of the dragon and transfer the right of ownership to him. As soon as the girl heard about some unknown guy, she was immediately overcome by a bad feeling. Seafiel remembered well that only one person had been involved in such machinations in her past life. This was the biggest swindler of them all, whose name was Adrian Barich, and from whom it was difficult to escape. And the lady could not under any circumstances allow the dragon to meet that terrible man. In a panic, the little girl pulled the man by the hand, although she didn't even have time to come up with an excuse for herself. The lady's stomach gave her an excuse in time, as it growled loudly, calling for her to fill it with food. Cherno was not one to leave a child hungry, especially one he had come to like. So the man, with a sigh, came to the decision that it would be easier for him to feed the lady right now. The tavern where they came to have a bite to eat turned out to have an unusually caring and talkative hostess. So, in just a couple of minutes, the heroine managed to bathe in a huge number of compliments, although she didn't ask for them. In fact, the heroine couldn't eat even one spoonful because she was worried about Cherno's contract. But the girl had no idea how to warn the dragon because she couldn't tell the truth. Even now, this place was full of people who were the front men for the big show. And Miss saw one guy so often today that she managed to remember his impudent face and appearance well. This is exactly what the heroine took advantage of, throwing a tantrum right in the middle of a small tavern. Her behavior immediately caused panic in the Duke, who did not know how to calm small children. The lady immediately pointed her finger at the young man she had already seen, declaring that he was in fact a ghost. The actor clearly didn't expect that someone would reveal his disguise so quickly at such a young age, and Sophia deliberately screamed louder and louder, so that everyone would definitely pay attention to that strange guy. The little girl was sure that she had already seen him several times during the day in different guises. That is why the miss dared to call that stranger a ghost who appeared everywhere. But in reality, the heroine prayed that Cherno would guess about such an obvious trick from the outside. The Duke himself didn't even notice that the same guy had been following him all day. But Sefil's words made the man take a closer look at the person who seemed suspicious to the lady. The actor realized too late that his disguise had been exposed so quickly by potential buyers. It was useless to keep up the appearances, so the guy desperately started to run. But he did not have time to go far, since few people were capable of escaping from a dragon. This behavior only made Cherno more interested, which confirmed his suspicions. But these guys were saved from punishment right now by a little girl who noticed something strange in the tavern kitchen. The ruler of the clan did not even have time to be surprised that just recently the lady was crying loudly in the center of the hall. But the heroine had no time for emotions anymore because she had to conduct a very large-scale investigation. She immediately noticed that for some reason the kitchen remained cold and clean, while usually in such places dirt inevitably appeared due to the constant work of assistants. Black was a smart dragon, so it wasn't hard for him to realize that he had stumbled upon an interesting scam. When an establishment has been open for a long time, traces of this inevitably remain in it. And the man saw that the tavern boasted that it had been operating for more than 10 years without rest. So it turned out that all these people were brazenly lying to the gullible dragon, and he didn't even notice anything. This situation enraged Cherno, who was ready to use cruel torture to obtain information for himself. So now the boys had to experience something that could not be shown to small children. As a result, their psyche turned out to be so unstable that the liars quickly confessed that they were thieves. They had a simple mission: to create the illusion of a bustling city for potential buyers. And all this was done in order to turn a long-abandoned city into at least a somewhat lively area. Miss had no idea how detailed the fraudster's financial plan was. But in the end, it turned out that many buyers were taken in by the scale of such an apparently profitable business. And now Cherno, who also fell for the bait, considered it his duty to find all the culprits. Of course, the heroine again wanted to go with her grandfather to save him from all the bad people. Despite her weak body, at that moment, the baby did not feel tired or have muscle pain. She was supported by emotions and adrenaline, as this complex case was just gaining momentum. Only the assistant almost ruined everything for the little girl, because he remembered that it was high time for her to go to bed. Sefil couldn't argue with that statement, as she had been living strictly by the clock for several months now. But Cherno needed support from any person, so he was not against taking the girl with him. This is how the heroine got a chance to save an adult who had become a disgrace to himself in his past life. Therefore, Noel had no choice but to silently accept the master's decision. So, under cover of night, they all arrived at the main sales building where people were handing out land. It was not difficult for Noel to cope with the ancient castle of the dilapidated building, because he loved his work. Unlike his assistant, Cherno was intensely focused on exposing the ringleaders of this lie. The assistant remained on guard in case anyone from the outside tried to enter. But the little girl went with the Duke, and they both tried to behave as quietly as possible so as not to be noticed. The man quickly saw the people who were to blame for many losing money for the sake of empty lands. They were cruelly happy that only their pockets and wallets were gradually getting bigger. Chief among them was Count Barish, whose impudent smile could confuse any confident person. The lady knew this man well, as he had considerable influence in her family. And right now, Adrian was happily discussing how easily he had been able to deceive yet another aristocrat. Cherno listened to all these words with a heavy heart, because he understood that they applied to him too, while the greedy Barish was boasting of his fraudulent exploits. The man had already given part of the money to pay off his debt to the guild, but still came out ahead. The heroine had clearly remembered that her uncle could not be trusted under any circumstances. He considered the people who did buy his land to be complete idiots, and didn't even try to respect them. Miss could not even imagine how difficult it was for Cherno to listen to such mockery at that moment. In his past life, it was Barish who was known as the most brilliant swindler in the empire. The man even got involved with government contracts, which led to the deaths of people. At that time, Alargo approved of Adrian's actions only because they were related, and the Count took full advantage of his position, since the main thing for him was to earn more money. Only Seafiel remembered how many people had suffered as a result of her uncle's terrible actions. Therefore, in this life, the little girl was going to prevent these huge tragedies among the population of the empire. So she allowed herself to look at her grandfather with a pleading look so that he would deal with this terrible man. Cherno himself was burning with the desire to act, since it was unpleasant for him to listen to ridicule at himself. The dragon did not hesitate any longer, because this matter required prompt intervention. The Count clearly did not expect to meet one of his customers at such a time when he was laughing at him. But the swindler was not called the best in his field for nothing, since he quickly collected his thoughts. One should have seen how developed Hadrian's eloquence was, but now even it would not have helped him. The man only successfully pretended to be happy to have a customer who might come to pay the remaining money. The whole point was that Barish had masterfully forged documents, and no one could have found out his lies. Therefore, no matter how angry Cherno was about the cruel deception, all his emotions were useless. The little girl herself had long ago noticed that according to the documents, her uncle was indeed a pure person. Adrian has always had a knack for coming out of situations where his back was against the wall, and now it looked as if he was selling the city to a businessman so that he could improve it. Neither the dragon nor the girl could argue with the iron logic of the cunning Count, who had thought everything through to the smallest detail. He was even right in that not long ago, a gate for space travel had opened in that territory. For this reason, the man had no intention of returning the dragon's down payment, since there was nothing to accuse him of. Seafiel knew well about this trait of her relative, who in his past life had constantly deceived her. When the little girl lived in the dungeon, everyone around her felt only hatred towards her. But the young lady really wanted to meet at least one person who would smile at her sincerely. And at that moment, Adrian became such a friend to the girl that she missed human care. But the heroine didn't suspect that this man was actually brazenly lying to her. From the very beginning, Vitego didn't care about his relative, since he only cared about his sons. But Adrian wasn't one to give up easily in situations where he was underestimated. The man quickly came up with a cunning plan in which he would deceive everyone around him. It was with these thoughts that the Count came to Seafiel, who was lost in reaching out to any person. Only a couple of weeks later, Barish tricked the little girl into finding out where her father's money was. For this reason, the lady was not fed for a long time as a punishment for her stupidity, while Hadrian himself calmly hid somewhere by the sea, having taken a large amount of money. In this life, the little girl had no intention of touching her uncle, even though he had seriously deceived her once in the past. But now that they had already met, the lady could not simply let go of her cunning relative. Of course, the aristocrat recognized the girl, but for some reason pretended that they had not known each other before that moment. Therefore, the lady had the opportunity to do harm to her uncle, who had treated her so cruelly in the past. In this situation, Cherno was at a disadvantage, since he did not have all the information about the gates on that land. But Seafiel knew for sure that the gates were not capable of passing a large number of people. Although previously, dragons knew of portals that could transport an entire army over distances, these gates were popular, so the land around them was always expensive. Only Hadrian hid the fact that he had found an unfinished gate that only allowed 100 people in. The construction of such portals began by another race of dragons many years ago, and there were only a few gates that remained unfinished, which is why they worked worse. In his past life, Cherno bought all the land around him in the hopes of using the gate. But this is precisely what ultimately led him to losses, since nothing could be extracted from that insignificant portal. And even the wisest assistants could not calculate the benefit of the unfinished portal. Only now did Remdragon realize how much he had hoped for the quality of the dragon technique. Along the way, the heroine only slightly nudged her grandfather toward the right thoughts so that he would emerge victorious. That's how they came to the conclusion that they needed to check the gates, and this scared the impudent swindler. Cherno immediately realized that there really was something wrong with the portal. Otherwise, the Count's reaction would have been different. So the ruler of the clan only became even more eager to personally see the portal in real action. The little girl knew that Barish had already been captured more than once, so anything could be expected from him. Now the Duke was most upset because he could not quickly return the money he had spent. Although the swindler promised to give everything back, he was ready to say a lot of things just to save his life. So this time, Cherno did not believe the lying man who had never told him the real truth. Only the heroine did not become despondent in this situation, because she had already managed to find a solution to the problem. The little girl only now revealed to everyone that Adrian was actually her uncle. She still didn't understand why the man had stubbornly hidden their relationship all this time, if he remembered the girl. Seafield's appearance was so memorable that everyone in Allergo knew of her existence. Adrian was always distinguished by the fact that he carefully followed the affairs of the family, although he did not participate in them. So he definitely should have known that Seafield had recently successfully escaped from her strict father. The heroine did not expect that her honest revelation would only cause a sly smile on her relative's face. The man had planned his escape in advance, so he didn't care about the baby's presence. As soon as the assistant tried to stop the swindler, a foul-smelling smoke suddenly filled the air. The lady was most affected by this smell, since her body was still too small. Noel acted quickly, but it wasn't enough to stop the gas from spreading. The room was in commotion as the Count's supporters arrived to save him from capture. Meanwhile, Seafield almost lost consciousness because her head refused to obey her. Adrian could not help but take advantage of this situation because he would have received a reward for the lady. Only Cherno noticed in time that Barish was trying to steal the baby, who had become Urga's bride. The dragon would never allow a man to steal what was now rightfully his family's. Although Seafield didn't move, she tried her best not to lose consciousness in this situation. As a result, the lady became much better. Since Cherno used his abilities for her, the Duke rarely used magic, but at that moment he could not act otherwise, because he wanted to save the girl. As a result, all of the Count's attempts to escape were quickly stopped, as the Duke's men turned out to be stronger. After everything Adrian had done, Cherno would never forgive him, because the matter had taken a personal turn. More than anything in the world, the man hated it when someone touched the people under his responsibility. So now Barrack will have a hard time, even though he tried his best to avoid punishment. Deep down, Adrian was a coward, so he didn't want to face any punishment. But he angered the Duke so much that the boy had no choice but to accept what he deserved. Cherno freely displayed his power because he did not worry about the consequences of demonstrating his strength. No man could withstand such a blow that would make anyone fall off their feet. Noel carefully ensured that the cunning Count could no longer escape from the hands of the wise master. Only the heroine kept her distance, since now it was not her battle, but a showdown between adults. The little girl had already done everything she could, and now she watched how Cherno dealt with everything. But even behind closed doors, Adrian's cries could be heard, unsuccessfully begging for mercy. It turned out that as long as the dragons observed the laws of the peace agreement, they could punish people. It was difficult for the heroine to imagine what the usually kind and cheerful Cherno was like when he was angry. Miss was afraid to even think about what might happen if the Duke, in a rage, accidentally killed the swindler. Seafield couldn't allow this to happen, so she rushed to the door as fast as she could, just to stop her grandfather. The little girl wanted Cherno not to cause too much harm to her uncle, although she did not like her relative. Noel attributed it all to the fact that the girl had a big and kind heart, since she was worried about the thief. But in reality, the heroine was afraid that there would be no one to return the money that the dragon spent. Adrian was indeed in such a state that he could barely react to the people around him. But Remdragon was helped by a small piece of paper that he found in the pocket of an impudent swindler. Noel knew very well that the company on the sheet borrowed money and then paid it back at any cost. So all they had to do was convince Barish to take the loan, and then they would be able to get their money back. The Duke was quite happy with this option, since the main thing for him was that the investment would justify itself. The lady did not understand only one word from the piece of paper about moneylenders, which meant a penalty. So the man briefly explained to the curious girl how financial matters were handled in general. The heroine responded by recalling how she had read about such information in a book and was even able to provide a quote. For the first time in his life, the Duke encountered a child who memorized laws. This circumstance greatly lifted the man's spirits. Although he had long forgotten how to smile, he was once again convinced that the little girl was an unusually smart child. With the help of the girl's hint, the man first figured out how to properly record the fraudster's violations. He needed several receipts at once, confirming that the count would not run away. This is how the lady became convinced that the dragon was truly terrible in his anger, although outwardly he looked calm. Most of all, Seafiel was glad that her troubled journey had ended safely, so the heroine's sleep that night was so calm, as if she had never experienced stress in her life. Of course, the dragon rented a whole hotel for the little lady so that she could enjoy all the amenities. So the little girl was happy, as she was enjoying her rest after a hard trip. Another maid was temporarily assigned to her so that the lady would not be left without help from adults. Seafiel trusted everyone in the Remdragon family because she had learned that the dragons were not lying to her. It was this woman who told the girl that Cherno had rented the most expensive hotel for her. The morning did not pass without problems, as Noel received a letter from the estate where the heroine's maids remained. It turned out that the assistants were very upset when they found out that someone else would be looking after the baby. No matter how the guy tried to resolve this issue, the girls remained just as sad. There were some happy events this morning, as the grandfather wanted to thank the lady for her help. At the sight of what the Duke had brought, the heroine's face turned white with surprise and amazement. For the first time in her life, she saw such a huge number of gifts that were intended for her. The man beamed with pride, because he had managed to impress the little girl to the depths of her soul, which was what he had originally wanted. He said he was just passing by and thought of the lady, but she couldn't believe it. The little girl's whole face shone with happiness at the sight of such a huge number of gifts. The man tried his best because he wanted to surprise the lady, and in the end, he succeeded perfectly. The heroine could not even imagine that the Duke was ready to buy her even 1,000 gifts. Greed flared up in the little girl, but she tried to put it in its right place. Seafiel knew how to impress people, so she said that one gift from her beloved grandfather would be enough for her. These words captured the entire heart of the dragon, who had long dreamed of being accepted by others. The girl played the role of a smart child brilliantly, without telling anyone about her transformation. The Duke had previously heard from Elton that Seafiel was an unusually intelligent child, but now he was personally convinced of the lady's genius, which only made him respect her more. True, the baby's body still reacted like that of ordinary people, so she often wanted to eat. At Cherno's request, the heroine found herself in a real restaurant with expensive dishes for the first time. Her delight was difficult to describe in words, because the lady loved to eat delicious food. Since the miss came into this family, she was constantly bathed in wealth and luxury. But Seafiel did not forget to take care of the dragons in return, who had so quickly fallen in love with her. So it didn't escape the girl's notice that the Duke had been in a sad mood all day. The heroine didn't know that this wasn't the first time Cherno had been deceived by cunning swindlers. For this reason, the man even thought about leaving the business completely. For the first time, the lady encountered a dragon that began to doubt its actions. As a good child, she was obliged to support her grandfather on his difficult path. At first, she pretended that she learned everything only thanks to her quick wits and intelligence. But in fact, the lady saw what a kind person the dragon was from childhood. It was for this reason that he did not pay attention to the shortcomings of people, and they took advantage of this. The scammers never told the truth, but they put pressure on the most important things for buyers. Seafiel knew that the Duke was completely different in nature from liars, and that was why it was difficult for him. Dragons always trusted each other verbally and never broke their promises. If the Remdragon family attacked opponents only in cases of dire need and struggle, people could fight only out of boredom or their selfish desires for growth and status. This is exactly what the little girl tried to convey to the man before it was too late. As a result, Cherno began to perceive the lady even wiser than even after the situation with the exposure. At that moment, the dragon finally believed that the lady could be trusted with any questions, so the girl became a wise friend for him, despite the big age difference. And from her, Cherno waited for advice on how to deal with his kindness and trust. Seafiel had no doubt that the Duke simply needed an experienced and intelligent advisor. The man then admitted that he would like to sell the deserted lands he had bought by mistake. But the lady knew that in the future they could be of great benefit to Remdragon. Therefore, she was categorically against selling the lands, even though they seemed useless. Cherno was unable to keep up with the lady's flight of thoughts, which was gushing with ideas. While Seafiel already knew exactly how to use the acquired territories, after everything that had happened between them, the Duke had no reason not to trust the little girl. So he was ready to listen to even the most unconventional and expensive proposal from her. The lady had not yet had time to think through all the nuances, but she already knew which option would be beneficial. But the girl didn't expect that Cherno would immediately be ready for decisive action. In the end, the man personally found an assistant because he was in a hurry to make decisions. The heroine was frightened when the Duke mentioned that they were talking about her fate, but it turned out that the grandfather liked the lady so much that he wanted to keep her with him. This is how a letter was sent to the Remdragon estate that Mrs. Vacation was continuing. Just like last time, the maids were upset, but could not influence this decision. This was all because the Duke needed to discuss the construction of the amusement park with the girl in more detail. Seafiel has managed to fully think through the concept of the park, which will attract many people. The little girl hoped to impress the aristocrats with large-scale and interesting buildings. She was sure that the nightlights and the beauty of the buildings would definitely attract attention. Shopping centers will serve as an even better leisure facility than the open-air park itself. And for the children, the lady has provided a huge pastry shop where delicious cakes will be available. The Duke agreed that all this could certainly bring great profits in the future. But now that land only allowed in 100 people a day, which was very little. Therefore, the man did not have much faith in the park's profitability, even with all the innovations. However, the heroine had a different opinion on this matter because she was going to make the park closed. It was precisely the high prices for a small number of seats that were supposed to bring in the main income. Thus, the plan to build an amusement park was quickly put into consideration and production. After this, the girl often heard the estate's servants praise her for her intelligence and wit. This is all because Seafiel remembered a lot from the past and skillfully applied it in the future. The only problem for her was the mayor of that land, who was greedy for money. The head of the land, Morikon, had heard well about the Cherno Company, which mined magical stones, and so he knew that the projects of this guild very often suffered disastrous failure. However, she still asked for permission to cooperate, sending a huge bribe. Even the mayor's assistant couldn't predict what exactly that strange company was planning. The guy was sure that the idea of a park on empty land would definitely fail in the future. Morikon had the same suspicions, so he easily signed the cooperation agreement. In fact, it was not without reason that the lady forced Cherno to obtain permission from the mayor of the land. After all, in a few years this man will accept cooperation from Vitego and become his partner. Their joint business will bring a lot of profit to the businessmen, but other aristocrats will suffer. That's why the girl needed to stop Morikon from banning their business through bribery. Now in the future, the heroine will not have problems with construction, because permission for it was obtained. So she threw herself into planning the park with the Duke, who trusted her. Literally a month later, all the ideas were put on paper, and construction finally began. The heroine was so carried away by this matter that she didn't even notice how quickly time flew by. The little girl had been busy making plans before, but it had never been so exciting. Only after signing all the papers was Cherno able to release the girl back to the estate. Seafiel's heart sank with joyful anticipation of meeting the kind servants and masters. The assistants missed their mistress so much that they were the first to run out to meet her. They couldn't believe their eyes when they noticed that the girl was completely fine. It turned out that the maids found it even harder to bear separation from the lady they had fallen in love with. The heroine was pleased to realize that there were people in her life who were waiting for her at any moment. This made the little girl herself even more drawn to the kind girls who took care of her. Although they would have to separate in the future, until that moment, the ladies devoted themselves entirely to the girl. Despite the long separation, their relationship only grew stronger after the long-awaited meeting. What surprised the little girl most was that it wasn't just the assistants who were looking forward to meeting her. All the knights of the estate tried their best, as they ordered a cake from the chef for the lady. Before, the heroine would never have thought that she would be so happy to return to the Remdragons. But everyone managed to become attached to the baby, and even the calm Elton was no exception. He too was looking forward to meeting the lady who was causing a fuss in the estate. The pleasant words from all sides made the heroine feel as if she really had a family. It so happened that Seafiel accidentally found love and support in the most dangerous family. A little later, the maid shared with the little girl everything that had happened in the house without her. Until now, the girl's heart beat anxiously at the thought that someone else was courting the miss. It turned out that all this time, the estate resembled a haunted mansion more than a residential place. But with the arrival of the girl, everything changed dramatically, which especially pleased the maids. Seafiel had no idea that her work on designing the park would take so long. All that worried the assistants was whether the girl followed the entire routine. Their biggest fear was that the baby was not being cared for properly in the city center. The heroine did not admit that she had indeed worked too much during the day. Due to the overload, she even periodically fell asleep on the spot, and no one woke her up. But Seafiel lied about it, just so the maids would worry a little less about her. But even this confirmation was not enough for the anxious and caring girls. The lady urgently needed to come up with some ironclad arguments so that her assistants would believe her. Otherwise, it looked as if the baby didn't need any daily care at all. But this is what hurt the twins the most, who gave themselves entirely to their mistress. In the end, only with the help of her cuteness was the girl able to calm her worried assistants. From this expression on the little maids' faces, they instantly melted and became kinder. That's how quickly and easily the heroine brought order to the estate as soon as she appeared in it. But the girl didn't expect that the surprises weren't over, because a pastry shop was waiting for her in the room. It turned out that Cherno had arranged in advance to please Ergi's bride even more. The maids barely hid this gift from the lady, as they wanted to tell her about it in advance. But the surprise was a success, and once again, Miss realized that she had chosen the right family. In a short period of time, she somehow miraculously managed to establish relationships with all the residents of the estate. So now, Seafiel could share the sweetness that her grandfather gave her with many people. The only problem was that of all his friends. Only the evil Ergo was nearby. Before the heroine had time to ask questions about the young man, whom she had not seen until now, the maid ran into the room. It turned out that she needed the twins' help, since the heir had started having another attack. This news overshadowed the joy of the lady's arrival, leaving behind an anxious atmosphere. From her past life, the lady remembered that with age, Erga's attacks only became more severe. And only the sisters, who were succubi, could slightly ease the young master's condition. At such moments, only they were allowed behind the closed doors of the boy's room, so as not to harm anyone. So now the assistants had to leave the lady, although they had not seen each other for a whole month. And in this situation, even Seafiel was powerless, although she knew a lot about the past and the future. The lady understood that the best solution now would be to simply not interfere with Ergi's illness. A couple of days later, the grandfather also arrived at the estate, and the lady joyfully ran out to him. She heard from the servants that Cherno might not come for years, and that's why she was so scared. But it turned out that the Duke no longer intended to follow the past rules that the servants remembered. Now, grandfather had a living reason to visit his native estate more often, and this reason was Seafiel, who madly pleased the trusting Cherno. Although the man himself intrigued the lady, he sat silently with a cup of tea for a long time. While the little girl was bursting with curiosity, she only thanked the Duke for the gift. Cherno didn't admit to himself that he really wanted to surprise the girl as much as possible. During their separation, the dragon came to the conclusion that he really needed an advisor. The heroine was glad that her grandfather listened attentively to her words, but Cherno's choice could have surprised anyone, as it was too unexpected. Seafiel never imagined that her man would consider her for the role of his advisor. No matter how much the Duke thought about it, he couldn't imagine anyone better than the little girl as an assistant. It was for this reason that he came up with a position in the company that was only suitable for a girl. What pleased the lady most was that her grandfather was even going to pay her a real salary. She was still worried about the future where she would be alone, so she wanted to save. Seafiel approached the money issue carefully, even when she communicated a lot with Daihan. During one of her walks, the lady noticed a rather nondescript publication on the bookshelf. The heroine didn't just ask the Duke for this book, because she knew its cost very well. The book about elves grew in price every year, so Miss already had financial support. And now the little girl could increase her wealth even more, so life promised to become easier. Of course, the lady would never have refused to cooperate with Cherno, which was beneficial for her. The man also suspected that the Miss would agree, so he prepared a seal for her in advance. Since the girl's nickname was Raccoon, he made the image in a form not on paper. The Duke wanted all of Sefiel's deeds to be marked with this seal, as evidence of her merits. The lady's heart fluttered with joy at the mere opportunity to record her actions on paper. When she worked for her father, no one knew that all the documents were handled by the illegitimate daughter. Day and night, the little girl kept financial records, carefully checking every item. But they didn't even allow her to put her name, because they didn't want to talk about the girl. But now, the heroine was not a tool, but an important employee of her grandfather's company. Although the salary was small, it was already a good start for the child. So Sefiel still had no reason to refuse, because she liked Cherno as a person. Unless Miss would like to not deny herself food in the future, when the dragons leave this world. Lately, the girl had been eating more and more sweets, and could not imagine life without them. She also did not forget about proper nutrition, as she was provided with the best dishes. But personal expenses for such delicious food would quickly leave the little one without money. But if the little girl gets an influential patron in the form of Cherno, then she won't have to worry about money, because the grandfather will be able to support the lady even if she ends up divorcing the heir. So Sefiel didn't hesitate when she agreed to the role of advisor in the dragon's company. The heroine honestly admitted that the salary did not meet her expectations, but she was willing to work for Cherno because she had long considered him her family. Such a frank statement made the man laugh, as he had not yet gotten used to the lady's honesty. Despite the Duke's laughter, Sefiel knew he could be trusted in any situation. The grandfather promised to take care of the girl's future, and the dragons did not break their vows. Their promise to each other, sealed with their fingers, was stronger than any magical contract. As a result, while talking with the man, the heroine did not even notice how quickly time flew by. The maid came to pick up the girl, who was already sleepily muttering something under her breath. Even in this state, the little girl thought about delicious food and a huge amount of money. She said goodbye to Cherno with regret, although she could barely stand on her feet because of her desire to sleep. As soon as the lady left, Elton noted that the elder duke had become very attached to the baby. The man didn't even think of denying this fact, since thoughts of Sefiel made him smile. But not all was well at the estate, as Urga's attacks worsened again. Even his father was powerless to ease the condition of the boy, who was turning into a dragon. Cherno partly blamed himself for not leaving this world before the birth of his grandson. Therefore, he was determined to do everything to leave this place when Urga grew up enough. The man was confident that in the other world, the young man's illness would quickly disappear. Until then, the Duke planned to put as much money as possible into Sefiel's secret account. The whole point was that the grandfather was going to transfer the girl's actual salary separately. Everything is done to ensure that in the future, the little one will not deny herself anything until her death. It turned out that Daihan had gotten ahead of his father and had opened an account for the lady in the family bank. Cherno was dissatisfied that he was not the first to make a contribution to Mrs. Personal account. Elton has already secured a sizable sum, taking the honor of money from the greedy Allergos. But even so, it was difficult for the grandfather to admit the fact of his loss to his smart son. It was the butler who had to bear the wrath of the master, who was known for his emotionality. The most offensive thing for Cherno was that he was not the first to give the little girl her pocket money. Elton could not have imagined that all the elder duke's complaints would be limited to this. Grandfather couldn't stand it when his son turned out to be better than him in important matters and affairs. In the end, he couldn't think of anything better to do than double the girl's bill from his own pocket. This is how the heroine became the richest person in the empire, although she didn't even know it. Until then, the little girl had to learn everything for a long time, listening attentively to Elton's explanations. In fact, the heroine remembered the material from her past life very well, but kept silent about it. Of course, Sefiel didn't know everything, and she was most interested in details about the magicians. The heroine hoped that she could become one of them if she had the ability to do so. Because of the demon blood in her body, the girl often felt like she had a little magic. But even so, it was not entirely clear whether Sefiel would be able to learn the art of magic. This was because the whole thing was like trying to open doors that usually wouldn't budge. Even Elton didn't know the exact ways to tap into magical energy, so the lady had to study the complex topic on her own again to find the answers. The butler was only sure that in order to use magic, one must have talent from childhood. Otherwise, the person who tries to cast spells will simply quickly become exhausted. The heroine remembered that there was a third brother in her family who had exactly this problem. This is one of the reasons why Vitego locked his daughter away for research, because he wanted to save his son. But now, Elton was sure that the baby had no predisposition to magic. In fact, Seafield had hoped for a different outcome, since it was not for nothing that she was born into a family of magicians. In such a matter, only an outside perspective could help, since the butler could sense magic. And he felt almost nothing in the girl, which is why he delivered such a strict verdict. No matter how sad the heroine was to admit it, she had to give up thoughts about magic. Moreover, the lady was also interested in the real history of the empire, which her family had not rewritten. In the past, the little one had to make do with descriptions that Allergo approved, so she didn't know much about the deeds of the first dragons that arrived in this world a long time ago. For many years, they generously shared their knowledge with people, living in peace with them. But the appearance of a dragon named Shunaria radically changed the entire history of relations between creatures. It so happened that he fell in love with an elven princess, although such unions were not approved. As a result, the first half-dragon was born into the world, after which history began to be written anew. The heroine immediately guessed who exactly was the first to be born from such a union. We were talking specifically about Cherno, who had done a lot for people in the past. Elton was only too happy to talk about the gentleman he had admired since childhood, and the lady completely shared the butler's enthusiasm, as she loved listening to stories. During those difficult times, the human world was ruled by demons, who cruelly mocked the defenseless. But at that time, the dragons had not yet gained sufficient strength to stand up to their terrible opponents, so they could only watch with pain in their eyes as the human race was humiliated. They were inactive, in part because they did not originally belong to this world. Therefore, any interference in the relationship between demons and people was considered wrong. But everything changed with the birth of Cherno, who was only half-dragon. The dragons then allowed the young master to protect the people if they accepted his essence. It was not difficult for the future duke to gain recognition, because he became the savior of the entire world. The man made a pact for dragons to cooperate with humans to fight demons. This is how the inbreeding began, which led to health problems for the dragons. But at that moment, Cherno was driven by the desire to save people, so he did not think about the sad future. This is how the now famous alliance of 4 families was formed, which until now occupied leading positions. The heroine guessed this in advance, which surprised the butler, who had not yet finished his long story. Each time, the assistant became more and more convinced of how smart the little girl was. The heroine still hasn't gotten used to the fact that she was constantly praised in this family for every little thing, while the butler believed that the little girl would become an excellent scientist in any field. Although the heroine had previously heard that no matter what she did, she would not be able to achieve success in anything, so now Sophia had no idea what she would become in the future. Because there were so many professions, she enjoyed her carefree life, which included a lot of sweets. But the girl's head was haunted by the thought that she really could become a cool specialist in her field. It was beyond the dreams of a little girl who was afraid to strive for something like that. In fact, the heroine had already received enough support to become anyone she wanted. Proof of this was another toy in the form of a piggy bank that the girl's grandfather gave her. The man was so happy that the lady liked the gift that he talked to her nonstop until he went to bed. Every day, the heroine became more and more surprised at how everyone around her was ready to give her love. But Seafield couldn't help but think that she should still enter the academy for the sake of her own development. The girl's brothers studied in the best places, while she only dreamed of something similar for herself. The maid was confident that the little girl was capable of any difficult task in this world. Moreover, in such an important matter, the Rem Dragon family will definitely not leave Sophia without proper assistance. Therefore, the lady's distant dream, which seemed incredible to her, could well come true in the future. After all, everyone in the Rem Dragon family loved the baby so much that they were ready to help in everything. And the maid didn't tell Sophia that her new piggy bank cost several times more than tuition at the academy. The very next morning, the heroine began to carry out her important duties. The elder duke also worked alongside her, although he had a somewhat different range of concerns and affairs. Seafield devoted herself entirely to these seals, which she placed on each document after verification. The girl was pleased to realize that now a part of her would forever remain in the history of the Rem Dragon family. Cherno tried to create the best working conditions for the little one so that her childish body could cope. So the lady enjoyed putting seals, even though she spent her time without games. Only the assistant knew that Seafiel would receive a percentage of the income from papers bearing her seal. The construction of an amusement park was sure to bring in good profits for the Remdragon family. An improvement of the territory would only increase the received budget, according to preliminary forecasts, and with each seal placed, the lady's wealth only grew greater and greater. But the assistant wisely kept silent about this, since the Duke clearly intended to make the girl even richer. Towards the end of her work, the heroine noticed one of the newspapers on the table that was hidden from her. Curiosity got the better of the lady, so she examined the material, although she was asked not to touch it. It turned out that the newspaper had written an article about her family, which was not doing very well. Vitego was so angry with his relative that he was going to send him into exile. But the Count came to Allergo in the hope that he would help him sort out his problems. No matter how much the boy begged his brother to change his decision, not long ago he had seriously offended him. What the man hated most was losing financially, and here others were doing it for him. Adrian could not deal with his debts to the Remdragon family on his own. Only a miracle could have saved Count Barich in this situation from the just wrath of the ruler of Allergo. And the man remembered that he had been interrupted by Seafiel, information about whom Vitego had been collecting. The head of Allergo had already regretted more than once that he had not killed this annoying girl with demon blood in time. Adrian accidentally hit his brother's weak spot, which is why he noticed doubts on his face. Now, Vitego did not blame the Count for everything, considering him a victim of unfortunate circumstances. It was only to Barich's advantage that Allergo still hated Seafiel so much. But the chief's anger was enough for his brother, whom he ordered to be eliminated along the way. The man was having a hard time coping with the fact that the girl had managed to escape from his arms, and now she was in the inaccessible Remdragon estate, happily hiding from her father. This made the murder of the baby much more difficult, but the Duke did not plan to give up. Although he had no opportunity to get the girl, Allergo considered it a matter of time. At this point, Vitego planned to accumulate enough strength to fight Remdragon. While her father was inactive, the heroine lived peacefully on the territory of her new family's estate. The maids looked after the lady so well that they didn't give her a moment's peace all day long. But Miss did not complain, as their care provided her with additional security. This time, Seafiel desperately wanted to talk to someone from Remdragon, but she still couldn't find Daihan, although he went out for a walk a little earlier than her. So the girl wandered around the area in confusion, because she had no other things to do today. What upset the heroine most was that Urgi was not getting better and was constantly sleeping. Restless thoughts constantly visited the little girl, no matter how much she tried to drive them away. The only thing that saved the lady was her lessons with Elton, who explained any material to her very well. After lunch, she usually played in the garden or slept, restoring her strength after work. So Seafiel didn't even notice how quickly the time flew by until the park was finished. The girl was sure that it was impossible to build an amusement park in such a short time. In response, Cherno admitted that he had used a little magic to speed up the construction. The heroine knew that dragons had always been more powerful in the use of technology, so it wasn't difficult for the Duke to dig up the secret techniques of the vanished race of dwarves somewhere. This made Seafiel feel even more respect for her grandfather, who knew how to do so much. But the little girl still had little to do, as she wanted to surprise people even more. The lady already had a plan on how to properly advertise the amusement park. In the past, the heroine studied a lot about how to properly develop even the most complex business. She was lucky to observe her father, who was constantly promoting some financial projects. Then the little girl had no other choice, and she worked through all these thoughts for free. While no one in high society ever found out about her scientific research, but now the situation was radically different, because Cherno had no intention of appropriating the girl's ideas. The man was ready to listen to any advice from the lady he appointed as a consultant, so he had to spend some money, because the little girl had a huge number of ideas. She started her huge advertising campaign with the homes of rich and wealthy aristocrats. Many of them received letters inviting them to a new amusement park for everyone in the morning. But inside the envelope was something that made the aristocrats pay attention to the letter. The girls couldn't believe their eyes when they saw a real gold brooch. The gifts didn't end there, as Cherno used magic to put a few more into the envelope. No aristocrat could ignore such an announcement about the opening of a park. A few days later, the lady sent invitations to the houses of people who were not so rich. And after that, she didn't forget about those who were just trying to achieve status in high society. As soon as the young aristocrats received the letter, they began jumping on the spot with joy. As a result, the letters became long awaited for many who had not yet received them at home. This is how, in just a few days, the heroine skillfully attracted public attention to the park. The grandfather was amazed by the hard work and perseverance of the little girl, who sent letters all day long. Seafield took this task upon herself alone, since it was important to maintain a certain order. But now she was sure that people would not forget about their amusement park for a long time. The dragon never ceased to be amazed at how smart the girl was, despite her age, while the heroine was beaming from the pleasant compliments that sounded from her grandfather. But she didn't expect that, at the end of the day, Cherno would have one very important thing for her to do. It turned out that the man wanted to make Seafield the first guest of the newly built park. Of course, the lady would never have refused such an opportunity to see this place. At first glance at the park, the little girl was deeply impressed by its scale. The idea turned out to be even better in practice than when the heroine came up with it all on paper. The butler assisted the Duke closely during the construction, so he was responsible for many things. That's why he was the one who launched the park with magic, impressing everyone present. Seafield's eyes were ablaze with delight at the sight of the former empty space. This was the reaction Cherno had been looking for, so now everything inside him was seething with pride. The man couldn't resist and used magic to lift the lady into the air so she could get a better look at everything. What he didn't know was that the little girl had actually been afraid of heights since childhood. But at such a distance, her words did not reach the ground, so the lady had to endure. No matter how much the maids supported Seafield at this moment, she did not stop being afraid. But literally, a couple of minutes later, the views that opened up so captivated the lady that she forgot about everything. Cherno tried to make sure that the air load on the girl's body was less. Thanks to her grandfather's efforts, the heroine personally inspected the entire park from a flying height. She was grateful to him for such an opportunity, which Daihan had once provided. From now on, things in the park promised to only get better, as it amazed everyone at first sight. The little girl remembered that day for a long time, as she ran tirelessly between the rides and entertainment. Quite quickly, rumors about the fascinating park began to spread from the children of aristocrats. Boys and girls of all ages dreamed of visiting this place at least once. But although the heroine received a lot of good reviews, for some reason, she continued to worry. Since its opening, the park has been consistently full of people, despite limited space in the portal. The rides operated without interruption, but everything worked so smoothly that there were no questions. Seafield visited the park often to make sure people were happy. She noticed that many perceived it as heaven on earth, which is what she had originally tried to create. But the little girl wasn't sure that the Duke was also happy with his construction. What the girl was most afraid of was that the man might not like this world of people. She herself perceived the park as the best place on earth in which one could relax. But the dragons didn't come from here, so they might have had a different understanding of the situation. For now, Cherno was enjoying the time his family had in this world. But the heroine knew that in the future, she would be left alone, because all the dragons would go to their relatives. For now, the Duke planned to live in this world, since there was no way to leave it. People attracted the dragon with their carelessness and ability to enjoy any little thing. Therefore, he watched them with pleasure, without thinking about difficult plans for the future. In fact, the heroine wanted to ask Cherno so many questions, but then she would have given herself away. So, while the lady continued to live in the estate, she tried to think only about the good. But a month later, anxiety overtook the little girl again, who was worried about the results of the park. What she feared most was that the statistics would be against this distant place. The assistant had done all the calculations in advance, but could not immediately proceed to them without the rest of the information. So all Seafield could do was wait in panic for Noel to announce the results. Because of this, the lady ignored all the rest of the assistant's words, as she was excited. What she was most afraid of was that this idea of hers would turn out to be a failure, and that everyone would turn away from her. In the little girl's terrifying fantasies, even Erga was scolded, because the park didn't live up to expectations. She would hardly have been able to cope with such shame, even though she had little contact with her fiancé. This was the reason why the lady was so worried, because she did not want to hear about a bad end for the park. But when the lady decided to ask about the quantity, she found out that she had guessed the wrong number. Noel seemed to be deliberately stalling, trying not to immediately tell us about the effectiveness of the rides. No matter what options the lady named, she always missed the same number. In the end, the Duke could not stand it any longer and demanded that his assistant name the number of people right then and there. Neither Cherno nor Sifiel expected that the park would break all attendance records this month. Noel himself didn't believe it, but his recalculations always gave the same answer. The girl and her grandfather were overjoyed, because together they had created a very profitable business. The dragon could not express in words how grateful he was to the little girl for her help, while the lady did not believe that the park's successful policy was solely her doing. However, there was no way to convince Cherno, because he had been trying for so many years to do something worthwhile. So the dragon once again promised the girl that he would not leave her without an inheritance in the future. The more time they spent together, the more the Duke wanted to provide the baby with everything. The lady had to be patient, because she wanted to receive her reward now. But the heroine understood that she looked like a child, and they couldn't manage their finances. The girl didn't even try to explain to anyone that in fact her soul was an adult. So she personally monitored their company's position in the market, and it suddenly rose rapidly. Now Cherno's company was just a little bit away from first place, and the lady wanted to help with this. The assistant knew that dragons always accomplished what they wanted, but defeating a Lurgo would be difficult. So the heroine was faced with the difficult task of making her former family go bankrupt. And even the best assistants of the Remdragon family were unlikely to find an answer for the girl. Meanwhile, in the office of Mayor Morahan, who owned the territory near the park, other events were taking place. The man remembered well how reporters attacked him and all the company's assistants. Journalists wanted to know what the main secret of the park's massive success was, and Noel personally assured everyone that it was only about the raccoon, which became the symbol of all the attractions. It never occurred to anyone that the guy was using this method to disguise his words about Seafiel. The mayor didn't know about this either, but he was still angry about the company's success, which he himself had allowed. If he hadn't signed the waiver, he could have gotten a huge percentage of the park. And now, Morakan could only be angry at his own stupidity and Remdragon's cunning. Seafiel deliberately bribed the mayor with her grandfather's money so that he could not make any claims. With this, the little girl made herself a dangerous enemy in the person of the man, but for now he was forced to remain inactive. Whatever Morakan might come up with in the future, the lady was confident that she would deal with his crimes. Previously, in the terrible dungeon, the little girl was cold at any time of the year due to the poor conditions, and now she didn't even notice the frost outside the window, since she lived in a warm and pleasant room. The lady had noticed more than once that her maids were not at all afraid of the cold, being outside without clothes. But as soon as Seafiel tried to repeat their feat, the assistants immediately became horrified. Although the heroine was not cold, she understood that the child's body could fail her. So every time the girl went out for a walk, she now had to carry a huge amount of clothes. The lady was so hot that even the cold snow could not save her from the warmth due to her large outfits. But the miss did not dare argue with the maids, who knew better how to take care of her. It was enough for Seafiel that her assistants did not stop her from doing whatever she wanted. And this time, the little girl remembered the existence of a greenhouse that was located not far from the estate. Nowadays, almost no one came to this small garden, so the place was constantly empty. But the beautiful flowers continued to grow stubbornly in complete solitude, displaying miracles of perseverance. The heroine heard that Urgi's mother had previously tried to grow medicinal plants in the greenhouse. Taking a closer look, the girl actually noticed that the weeds growing around were not ordinary weeds at all. There were very few sorceresses in this world who knew how to grow certain plants, and the deceased duchess was one of them, so she skillfully cared for even the most harmful flower. In part, the little girl envied the woman, who knew much more about plants than she did. She was still amazed at how many magical herbs were preserved in this place. The heroine knew so much about plants because her family was involved in breeding new varieties. It was the lady who, in her past life, constantly studied herbs, trying to crossbreed them. That's why she could now easily distinguish magical flowers from those that could be called ordinary. In such a situation, it was beyond the ever-curious Seafiel's strength to resist the flowers, so she committed a small theft, consoling herself with the thought that it was necessary for research. It was only on this day that the heroine noticed some new flower that had appeared in the greenhouse. Its very appearance surprised the girl, since she knew well how rare this plant was. The whole point was that by some miracle, a real moonflower grew in the greenhouse. It was such a rare plant that its seeds alone took many years to grow. And even for this simple matter, a huge number of conditions had to be met. So not all experienced wizards and gardeners managed to achieve their goal. The moonflower that had sprouted in the greenhouse was now in its closed form, but the heroine knew that soon it would shine, and its price would skyrocket. She couldn't believe that no one else in the estate knew about the appearance of the moonflower. This meant that the girl could grant herself all rights to use it. At this time, Duke Daehan returned to the estate after a long absence on business. Elton immediately noted that the gentleman had surprisingly quickly completed the assigned tasks. The whole point is that Remdragon closely cooperated with the Pullo family in the west of the empire. Although the war with the demons had long since ended, their raids still continued gradually. Usually, when Daehan went to help as a mercenary, he was gone for several years. Therefore, the assistant was surprised that the gentleman had broken his usual routine. Some demons were actively trying to get into the human world, and they had to be stopped. Daehan was one of the best in the battle, and that is why he offered his help to the west. But now he was confident that the young Duke Pullo would be able to cope with the enemy raids. Suddenly, the butler had an idea as to why the gentleman had returned home so early. Elton was willing to bet that during his short absence, the man had missed Seafiel. However, the Duke himself denied this fact until the very end, although he was eager to see the girl. But right now, he was more interested in the state of the young heir. Elton had nothing to please Daehan with, as Urja was getting worse every day. The guy almost never woke up, trying in this state to ease the progression of the disease. But the dragon's attacks still overtook the young man as soon as he relaxed a little. The Duke himself had gone through something similar in his youth, so he understood how difficult it was for his son. But he could do nothing to help the heir, since each of the dragons bore this pain himself. The Rem dragon family has been plagued by this curse since its inception due to the mixing of bloodlines. No matter how much Elton searched for healers, Urga's situation was too unusual for treatment. The only thing that pleased the Duke was that the boy had already approved of his future sweet daughter-in-law. Only now did he decide to find out what the little girl he had missed had been doing. He was ready to believe that Seafiel spent all day dressing up in beautiful outfits, or she would bathe with cute ducklings, which the maids provided in large quantities. But the Duke did not expect that the little girl would spend all her free time in the garden. Although he personally gave her permission to do this, he did not think that the lady would be so carried away by such an activity. It seemed to the man that the garden, due to its abandonment, should have perished long ago. And amidst such horror in the greenhouse, it is unlikely that the little girl would have wanted to stay for long. So Daehan decided to personally check how things were with that mysterious place. Memories of his beloved wife still did not leave the Duke, although much time had passed since her death. Since then, he has never visited the garden, so this decision was extremely difficult for him. However, the man was not used to retreating in the face of difficulties, so it was time to overcome his fears. To his surprise, almost all the plants in the garden were in good condition, even though they had not been cared for. Each flower brought back memories of his wife to Daehan, causing his heart to clench with pain. He relaxed so much that he didn't immediately notice someone's presence near him. The unknown person hid in the bushes and clearly did not want to reveal his identity to other people. The Duke did not take any weapons with him, but boldly demanded that the man show himself to him. And suddenly, a young heroine, who had hid in panic from the newcomer, jumped out of the bushes. The man didn't expect the baby to behave so strangely after a long separation. The heroine had a bright smile on her face, as she was ready to be naughty all day long. The girl immediately rejoiced at the sight of the Duke, as he arrived with spring and brought her joy. For the first time in a long time, Daehan experienced strong emotions from another person when he saw him. Suddenly, pleasant memories of his beloved wife, who always took care of her garden, came flooding back to him. Even during her pregnancy, the Duchess believed that they would be happy together in the future. She promised her beloved to hide one little secret in the garden, in the hope that he would find it. And now Seafiel reminded the man of his beloved's oath, although he had not previously sought an answer to it. After meeting the Duke, the lady was eager to show him the most beautiful flowers in the garden. But first, the man was interested in how the baby felt during their separation. The heroine's appearance has changed dramatically since she arrived at the Remdragon estate. Daehan was pleased to realize that Seafiel no longer resembled that hungry girl. Instead, the lady even officially participated in the family's affairs, helping not only her grandfather. The Duke had no idea that the little girl would not even have time to be bored while he was away. Next to her, Daehan felt calm, even though he was in the garden of the deceased Duchess. The man was finally able to sort out his emotions, which made him feel quiet joy. What impressed him most was that Safil had set his father on the right path in a difficult business. It turned out that it wasn't only Dahan who did a good job, although usually all the results came from him. The lady did not expect that she would now hear praise from the Duke, who had previously seemed to her an evil man. She wasn't against it, but she still couldn't get used to such good treatment from others. Daihan was proud of the little girl, who boldly did whatever she liked. This was exactly what everyone in Remdragon was supposed to do, so Miss successfully complied. Because of the love with which these people surrounded her, the heroine was ready to constantly give them joyful smiles. The Duke's heart was breaking with regret that he could not spend all his time with the sweet girl. Although Daihan returned to the estate from the war earlier, he still had a lot of things to do. From the very beginning, Sefil planned to persuade the man to take her with him, as she wanted to see Erga. But Daihan couldn't allow the girl to wander around the estate wherever she wanted. Only the heroine's sweet look was able to soften the strict decision of the Duke, who loved order in everything. This is how the lady got her way. Although she did not intend to directly fulfill all of Daihan's requests, Sefil understood that the young man's condition was so bad that they could not see each other. But this did not stop the lady from leaving a small surprise right in front of the door of the guy who was still sick. As soon as the young heir saw the plant, he immediately guessed who exactly brought it here. A smile involuntarily appeared on Ergi's face, as the little girl had already managed to capture his heart. He still considered Sefil's actions childish, but for some reason, he couldn't be angry with the girl. That evening, the heroine worriedly wondered whether the heir liked her gift. The longer the lady lived in the estate, the more the guy's situation reminded her of her past. For this reason, the little girl did not forget about the guy, although she could not really help him in any way. That's why she tried so hard to make at least one of his days brighter and more pleasant in color. Meanwhile, Daihan noted with surprise that many things in the estate reminded him of the lady's presence. Even many things were carefully packed, so as not to harm the young bride Ergi in any way. Deep down, the man fully approved of the restructuring of the estate to suit the miss in it. Many of the assistants began to shine brighter with joy, as Sefil often made them smile. So Daihan felt with his skin the pleasant atmosphere that gradually filled the entire estate. Only now did he understand his wife's words, that she was sure that with the birth of the child, everything in the estate would change. The heroine's presence in the Remdragon mansion often seemed unnoticed by the owners, but she invisibly influenced not even the behavior of the maids, although she did not try to change the people around her. Because of this, even the air around the Remdragon territory seemed to become cleaner and more pleasant. All people were drawn to the little girl only because she always remained honest and kind, while the lady herself was only worried about the fact that she would soon turn 6 years old. She would never have thought that life could bring so much pleasure and joy. Time flew by quickly at the estate for the girl who acted as Duke Cherno's advisor. She didn't forget about the lessons from Elton, although she remembered all the material from her past life perfectly well. Despite all this, the lady felt that something was missing in her life, which had become much better. But for now, the little girl was unable to find the answer, because at first glance, everything seemed good. What pleased Sefil most was that this time, Daihan promised to stay a little longer. But it turned out that the maids were not so sure about this because of their master's strange hobby. The whole point was that Daihan enjoyed playing the role of a mercenary, which everyone knew except the lady. So the girl was sure that the next departure of the restless Duke was only a matter of time. Miss was unaware that the man always used a pseudonym for his travels, all for the sake of freely assisting Duke Polo in the fight against demons. It was Daihan, under the name of the mercenary Jere, who made a huge contribution to the cleansing of territories in the West. The heroine remembered that the Duke's activities had diminished when the dragons left this world, but his name still reminded the little girl of something she had studied a lot of material in the past. The girl's reaction was not long in coming, because she had never been particularly patient. So Sefil ran away from the conversation with the maid, who had given her an important idea. The lady could only find the answer to her question in the huge library, which was overflowing with books. Miss knew roughly what she should be looking for, so she found the book she needed quite quickly. It was a publication about all the known elven plants that had almost disappeared from this world. But Sefil had no idea why the names Zere and Urg reminded her of vegetation. She already knew that the elves revered the moonflower, which gave them a lot of energy and strength. But for many centuries, it was only occasionally possible to grow this plant, which was extremely demanding. But every time, at a lucky moment, the plant showed a bright light, which the elves named Jere. And when the moonflower blossomed, revealing all its beauty, it was renamed Ergu. Only now did the heroine realize why these two names seemed so familiar to her. As if on purpose, the man and the boy called themselves by names from the book that the elves respected. But the little girl couldn't find any information about the author of the book, who described all these plants. The cover only stated that the book had been given to the Duchess by the elves when she was alive. The heroine could not have imagined that such a pleasant legacy would remain from Daihan's deceased wife. She was sad that she couldn't meet this beautiful woman in person. So that same evening, Seafield tried to find out more about the Duchess from the maid. It turned out that the assistant thought well of the deceased lady, although she hardly knew her at the time. It so happened that during her lifetime, the Duchess had other assistants, and now there are none left on the estate. But everyone remembered Ergi's mother as a wonderful and kind lady who always brought joy with her. During her reign, the atmosphere in the estate was always joyful, no matter what happened. All the servants were delighted with how their lives were going, that they knew almost no worries or problems. Most of all, everyone respected the woman for her magical skills in growing plants. But it turned out that the little girl should not have mentioned the Duchess in conversation with her husband. The maid was still afraid of incurring the wrath of her master, who could not recover from the loss of his beloved wife. It so happened that mental illness took over the woman's entire consciousness at a young age. For this reason, after Ergi was born, she changed beyond recognition in a short time. It all came to the point that Madame refused to accept her son, although she had previously treated him well. Her hysterics became constant, and no one could help the lady calm down. Due to a terrible illness, almost no trace remained of the previously kind and sweet Duchess. Therefore, at that time, the Duke took on full responsibility for the upbringing of his little son. Seafield had heard this story before, but it still struck her deeply. All the servants knew that after that incident, the woman was locked in a separate wing of the estate for safety. But somehow she still managed to slip past the guards to commit suicide. Because of her conversations with the maid, the little girl thought all night about what had happened to the Duchess. This woman showed great promise, because she always remained kind and fair. So the lady couldn't understand how Madame could change so much in just a few weeks. But fate was an unpredictable thing, so the woman died early due to illness. Rumor has it that even half-dragons could remember everything that happened to them from childhood. The lady could hardly imagine what Erga must have felt because of such cruel memories. Coincidentally, Seafield soon had to face the story of the Duchess again. One day, the assistant asked the lady not to catch the eye of any of the estate's owners. The heroine herself noticed that the atmosphere around her had become gloomier, but she didn't know the reasons for this. The little girl didn't expect that today would be the anniversary of the death of her beloved wife, Daihan. It was for this reason that the maid begged the lady not to draw attention to herself that day. She could only hope that the little girl would listen to her at least once in her life. But the heroine was distinguished by her enormous curiosity, which did not allow her to sit quietly in one place. Moreover, the little girl noticed that not only the atmosphere in the estate, but also the weather outside the window had suddenly deteriorated. This was not part of the girl's plans, as she was hoping for a good weather forecast in the coming days. The whole problem was that Sophie hadn't anticipated the possibility of rain, so she hadn't covered the flowers. But they had only just blossomed, so any drop could have been fatal for them. And then all the heroine's efforts would have been in vain, as if she hadn't put any effort into the flowers at all. What bothered the lady most was that it would be 5 years before the next lunar flower would sprout. But she had never been so close to success as at the moment when she discovered the growing flower. The heroine remembered that only fire could save the fragile plant from the volley of cruel rain. The moonflower was not only rare, but also a magical plant, so it drew its power from fire. So all Seafield had to do was light a fire, and the plant would take care of itself. The only problem was that the maids had completely secured the entire area around the baby, so the heroine had nothing that would help her get the fire she so desired now. But there was no time to waste, so the girl decided to think about this problem on the way. It helped, and a brilliant realization actually came to the young girl's mind. She remembered that the Duke always used matches to light a fire in the fireplace. This meant that the lady only needed to take this item for a while, and the fire would be hers. At such moments, human curiosity always became stronger than the sense of self-preservation. So Seafeel hardly thought about the consequences when she climbed into Duke Daihan's office. He always used matches because his own fire was too strong. Therefore, it was not difficult for the lady to find the necessary item in the room where there were many things, but the heroine didn't take into account the possibility that the owner of the estate could return at any time. And just at that moment, he and his assistant were approaching his office after work. There wasn't even a place in this space where the lady could hide from the dragon's scent and eyes. The Duke was indeed in a bad mood, as he was not pleased to see the little girl. So the girl came up with her idea with fire at the wrong time, as she was caught right in the man's office. But Seafeel couldn't back down, because the lives of the magical plants depended on her actions. Therefore, although Daihan demanded that the matches be returned to him immediately, the lady silently and stubbornly refused. As a result, Miss had no choice but to quickly escape while the adults were still thinking. During her time at the estate, the girl's body had time to strengthen, so catching her would have been problematic. This is exactly what the heroine took advantage of while she was running and asking for forgiveness for her actions. Neither the Duke nor the assistant understood why the little girl was behaving so strangely that day. Naturally, the owner of the estate followed the girl, as he wanted to stop her from worrying. But Seafeel ran faster than she had ever run before, so it was impossible to catch her. So Daihan and Elton were quickly left far behind, despite the girl's attempts to stop her. Panic drove the young lady to notice how quickly the ground around her became wet. What added to the fear was the fact that if Miss was caught, she would not escape punishment for her pranks. But the plants were already so close that only a few steps remained to save them. Seafeel did not hesitate, because in this moment, which was dangerous from all sides, every second counted for her. It just turned out that the little girl didn't really know how to light a fire with matches. Only after several long attempts was the heroine able to obtain the long-awaited fire. The girl's happiness knew no bounds, because now all the flowers could be saved from the heavy downpour. But at that very moment, Daihan caught up with the mischievous girl who was playing with dangerous things near the plants. The man was so angry also because the lady could harm not only the flowers, but also herself. For the first time in her life, the heroine faced the wrath of the Duke, who had previously only smiled at her. He rarely lost his temper, but when it happened, only a miracle could save the others, so it was hard to even imagine how scared the lady was at that moment. But the heroine didn't lose her composure, because she sincerely believed that it was the right decision to protect the flowers. Only now did Daihan notice that very magical plant, which grew extremely rarely, despite his skills. His wife tried for a long time to grow the flower, but even she ultimately failed. But the woman had no intention of giving up, as she believed that her efforts would definitely bring results. Suddenly, the little girl felt the heat of the fire, which, along the length of the match, reached right to the tips of her fingers. In this situation, no amount of the Duke's reflexes could have saved him from the match falling to the ground. And so it happened that the man had been trying to avoid all this time while he was running after the young lady. In the end, he only managed to pick her up in his arms, watching in horror as the fire spread. But in fact, the heat was not dangerous at all, which Seafeel knew very well from the very beginning. The moonflower absorbed almost all the fire, leaving only its illusion on the surface. Therefore, the flame only glided carefully over the plants, but did not cause any damage. A long time ago, the heroine read in a book that special conditions are needed for the moonflower to grow, and the flame around was one of them, as the plant happily fed on the heat. Looking at the beautiful garden around him, the Duke suddenly found himself again in warm memories. One day, his wife told him that she had tried to grow a moonflower because it reminded her of her husband. The woman always found the connection between the flame flower and the fire dragon amusing. After such pleasant associations, Daihan inevitably blushed, which he allowed himself to do only when he was near his beloved. But Seafeel evoked no less emotion in him, although the man was not ready to open his heart. It turned out that all this time, the girl had been planning to show the man all this beauty in its full form. Over the years, the Duke had forgotten that the elves called this safe flame by the name of Zire. But once upon a time, the Duchess told him this beautiful legend that reminded him of the dragon. And now, it's the little girl's turn to once again talk about the beautiful meanings of names in the Rem Dragon family. Because the flower was called Erga, because it was the most beautiful of all the others. The man was ready to watch the safe fire for hours, but it soon died down. And then, the Duke began to wonder how the lady had even found out about all the nuances of the moonflower. The little girl had to lie that she had simply read something similar in one of the books about plants. Although in fact, in her past life, the heroine studied a lot about plants and nature. So Seafiel was absolutely sure that from now on, the entire land of Remdragon would become fertile. Previously, this was the ultimate dream for a girl, but now it has almost become a reality. With memories flooding back, the Duke decided to show his son's fiancée something. Seafiel had never been to this part of the estate before, so she didn't know where this journey would lead her. The heroine noticed almost immediately that there were already many cracks and scratches on the floor in the corridor, as if someone had gone crazy. It turned out that Daihan brought the baby into his wife's room because he hoped that she would understand him. For a long time, the Duchess's diagnosis remained just as terrible and disappointing. The woman would either become hysterical or furiously attack the people who were trying to help her. But during such terrible days, there came periods of enlightenment when Madame became aware of herself again. However, all this did not save her from committing suicide not far from the greenhouse with her favorite plants. Then, Daihan found matches near his wife, but he couldn't even imagine why she needed them. The heroine saw how difficult it was for the man to even tell such a short story about his wife. She never insisted on history, and now she realized that she had been doing the right thing all this time. But the girl didn't know that with her help, Daihan was getting better every day. Seafiel reminded him of his wife, who had clearly behaved in exactly the same way as a child. Therefore, the man no longer had any doubts about accepting the lady into his family. The girl was only glad to hear that another dragon had accepted her identity without question. She herself was eagerly awaiting the moment when she could rightfully call the Duke her father. Their relationship increasingly strove for harmony and idyll, despite all the early prejudices. Meanwhile, Elton visited the young gentleman, who was still suffering from the cursed disease. The butler saw how difficult it was for the boy, because no one could help with his condition. However, the young man surprisingly endured all the problems with fortitude, continuing to silently endure the pain. And this time, he was also distracted from his suffering by an incomprehensible glow outside the window, which he had not seen before. The boy was skeptical that the little girl was able to open a rare moonflower, so the assistant had to make an effort to get the gentleman to personally look at the blooming. Such an event happened once every few centuries, so it was worth seeing with your own eyes. Despite his mischievous nature, Erga couldn't help but smile at the beauty around him. Elton had been afraid of the gentleman's negative reaction all this time, but now he breathed a sigh of relief. The assistant rarely managed to find the young Duke in a good mood, as he was ill, and now the butler himself was ready to dance with joy, because Erga finally smiled. Even a week after the glow, everyone around could see changes in the soil for plants. Due to the magic of the moonflower, the entire soil was saturated with rich organisms and was now even glowing. Even the all-knowing Elton encountered such an amazing and beautiful phenomenon for the first time. The little girl expected something like this, but the result exceeded even her expectations. Of course, she could only use the soil for plants with the Duke's permission, and Daihan was not against it, since such magic in the earth was the merit of Seafiel alone. This is how the heroine came closer to the day when she could get rich by selling plants. From now on, even the owner of the estate will not be able to stop the girl from creating her own business. But the lady did not expect that the appearance of new guests at the estate would greatly disrupt all her plans. For the first time in a long time, elves came to bow to the dragons, although they usually hid in the forests. Daihan had no right to refuse important guests a visit, since cooperation with them was profitable. While Seafiel and Elton did not understand why these creatures would even come to them at such a time, it turned out that the elves were interested in the powerful magic they sensed from this land. Therefore, new acquaintances came in order to personally meet the heir's young bride. Seafiel had no idea what the high elves wanted from her. The woman who was going to lead the negotiations was named Brienne, and she had already worked with the Rem Dragons. However, neither the butler nor the Duke had heard of anything like this, although they would have been happy with such interaction. A guess occurred to Daihan, who knew that his wife periodically dated someone, and he turned out to be right, since the Duchess was cooperating with the magic tower in the Elven Forest. Together, they tried for a long time to create golden pollen that would make any land fertile. No one else in the estate knew about this, only because Daihan's wife did not reveal herself. She wanted to surprise her beloved husband after her difficult case was completed successfully. The heroine did not expect that the elves would now ask her to grow their magical plants on her land. But the little girl has already come up with a whole plan for earning money in such a fertile occupation. But now all her dreams of wealth were destroyed after just one request from the elves. The lady understood that she could not refuse them, since cooperation was too profitable a solution. Elves always built honest relationships, and were also so beautiful that they blinded Miss. Brienne was willing to offer the girl any support if she agreed to their terms. This opportunity to gain access to elven technology was too tempting for the lady to refuse. Only the Duke was dissatisfied with the fact that he had not been warned in advance about his wife's former affairs. But Brienne showed that she was genuinely interested in working with Seafiel, and the girl completely shared the elf's emotions, since she had already managed to come up with another business. No matter how sorry the lady was, she still decided to give the fertile land for the use of the elves. But Miss didn't do such a good deed for nothing, because she was counting on some of the plants. It was clear that she would make much more profit if professionals took care of the matter. Therefore, the heroine was only glad to find a common language with the elves, who were the best at growing plants. Brienne trusted the girl from the very beginning, who possessed the charm of the late Duchess. So, after a few days, the heroine was happily enjoying how things were going for her. She didn't really see Cherno and Ergu, but that didn't diminish her happy state in the estate. Seafiel even noticed that Daihan began to behave calmer, although a lot had happened. Therefore, the lady could afford to relax in bed, because she had managed to achieve a lot. But even in good times, restless thoughts prevented the little girl from sleeping soundly. No matter how hard she tried to push away the anxiety, it always returned with renewed vigor. All because the heroine was sincerely worried about the condition of Ergi, who did not leave the room. The girl still wanted to share with the young man all the beauty of the beautiful moonflower. But this was difficult to do, because she was forbidden to personally visit the boy during his illness. But the flower could soon stop blooming, and it will be a long wait for this event. This is how the heroine came up with the idea that she could move the plant to the treehouse. The little girl had secretly visited this place before, hoping to spot Erga from afar. But during all this time, she never once came close to her fiancé. It was as if he was deliberately hiding from her, while the things that the lady left for him were periodically moved from their places. Therefore, Miss had hope that this time, Erga would notice her new gift. Recently, she has become very good at climbing trees, as her body has gotten stronger. The girl took a flower with her, which she carefully wrapped to carry it safely. The little girl was most afraid of accidentally getting hurt while climbing up. After all, then the maids will forbid ladies to go out for walks without their accompaniment for a long time. That's why Seafiel tried so hard to be careful, so that nothing would happen. But it had just rained recently, and Miss had not taken this dangerous factor into account for the climb. Her carelessness caused the heroine to fall head over heels, slipping on the branches. Everything could have ended tragically if at the last moment the heir had not suddenly grabbed the lady. It was immediately clear from his face that Erga was not happy about such a meeting where he had to save the baby. Although the heroine felt relieved, the young duke's emotions seriously frightened her. The boy clearly expected to spend this day in peace and quiet, but that did not happen. So his dissatisfaction poured out, no matter how hard he tried to hide all his emotions. Remdragon tried his best to communicate delicately with the miss, so as not to accidentally offend her, while Seafiel was slowly recovering from her accidental fall from the tree. The little girl was sad to realize that immediately after the gift, she would have to return to the estate. But the lady did not know how she should drag out the time to talk longer with the future groom. No matter what she said, the boy was still not in the mood for communication, because the lady had come to his house. But he remembered that the girl had a copy of her house, created from cookies and sweets. Because of his illness, the boy was not interested in much, as he was in a depressed state. So the stories about the girl's exploits made little impression on him due to his egoism, which had swelled to enormous proportions. While Seafiel hoped until the very end that she would be able to hear at least one praise from the young man. But instead, he became interested in the pendant she now wore around her neck as jewelry. The girl had received this thing from a maid not long ago, so she carefully took care of it and looked after it. But Miss didn't expect that Erga would pay attention to this particular piece of jewelry. Of all the items, the ring was truly unusual, as it allowed its owner to see only good dreams. But the heroine still didn't understand how to fully use the gift and control her dreams. Only someone with magic, like Ergi, could have told the lady the answer to this difficult question. But for some reason, the boy was in no hurry to bring the girl the long-awaited explanation of the situation. Although he also charged the ring with his magic, he did not tell the little girl any details. His mischief still knew no bounds, but the lady still handed the boy a moonflower. He immediately guessed that this was the plant that his mother had once worked on for so long. The woman remained forever in the dragon's memories as an unstable creature. He wasn't sure that she had ever shown him love and affection in her life after his birth. The heroine roughly understood the young man's emotions, which is why she was so afraid of his rude refusal of her gift. But in the end, the boy took the flower, although he pushed away the girl who was worried about him. Seafiel could never understand why she was not allowed to see her future husband, while the guy was afraid that the lady might become like his crazy mother. As soon as the maids heard about the little girl's adventures, they were horrified. The assistants tried all the time to ensure that the lady did not collide with the air, but keeping track of her every minute was beyond their powers, so Ergi and Sefiel's meetings took place. However, now the twins have a chance to truly interest the young lady. The whole point was that from that day on, the heroine's training moved to a new stage. The maids themselves were delighted that the girl would now be looked after by special people. She really wanted to get into the academy, and after talking to a good teacher, she will succeed. After all, only the best magicians and scientists in the entire history of the Empire graduated from that building. But the heroine wasn't sure that she would be accepted into such a good establishment. While the maids had no doubt that the little girl would charm anyone with her intelligence, they experienced all the charm of a girl who didn't even try to attract them. The heroine was most surprised by the fact that the interview with the teachers would be tomorrow. This meant that she wouldn't even have time to prepare herself mentally. So by the morning, the little girl was on pins and needles, waiting for her interview with the teachers. And the first to enter the door were incredibly handsome guys who were ready to show off themselves. They always worked as a team, thereby better complementing each other's knowledge. And the trio hoped for a positive outcome to train the young lady Sefiel. Only one heroine knew that in fact all these people were impudent spies from her father. All the servants were only happy that the little girl would finally have worthy teachers. But the lady herself did not wish to choose any of those who were presented to her at that moment. Her confusion did not escape the eyes of Elton, who always kept a watchful eye on the lady. Only to him did the girl honestly admit that she did not like these candidates for the role of teachers. The little girl was most stressed by the conditions under which the butler hired teachers. The heroine would like such a salary for herself, but it was as if someone asked her opinion. Elton had prepared all the documents in advance, so he had no doubt about their impeccability and correctness. But the lady was troubled by the fact that the teacher's mistakes could even result in the death penalty. She would never have thought that anyone would be capable of agreeing to such terrible conditions. But the girl had to spend a long time communicating with people who could very well die. However, Elton was not bothered by anything, because the baby's safety was above all else for him. The three guys were ready to do anything just to get this coveted position, so Seafiel had to come to terms with the fact that they had to be considered for the role. Each of the men was good in a certain area, which he now proudly boasted about. They were confident that together they would provide the lady with a decent education in a short time. The boys submitted their applications with promises that Miss would definitely be admitted to the academy. But for Seafiel, all this did not change the fact that these people were cunning spies. The girl clearly saw that the cuts on the first man's hands were reminiscent of his activities as a killer. The little girl remembered the second one's face well from his past life, since he worked for her father. And this man was now skillfully pretending that he wanted to work for the good of the Rem Dragon family. And the third one was even willing to cheat, just so the girl would hire him. This characterized the guy as a person who could easily sell himself for money. The little girl always treated such people with disdain, because they could betray her. Only true madmen would agree to sacrifice their lives for the sake of a stranger's child. Therefore, the lady hoped that another candidate would appear soon. And her hopes were justified, as Elton actually invited 4 people to play the role of teacher. And the 4th person was a little late, but at that moment he appeared in the interview room. Everyone looked with interest at the woman who so bravely opened the doors, even though she was late. The faces of the 3 boys darkened at the sight of the lady, as they considered them unworthy of being teachers. But the aristocrat had already heard more than once that only men could pursue a career in science. This lady's name was Miela Shu, and the heroine knew her well from her past life, when she lived in a dungeon. Then, this lady became the first and only mentor for the little girl. So only Miel could the lady trust, since she had never betrayed her. From the very first meeting, Shu maintained a stern expression on her face, but taught the little girl everything. That's why the curious Seafiel never complained about the teacher, even though she was afraid of her. And in the past, the academy has always been the embodiment of light and intelligence for all aristocrats in the empire. And the territory of Alurgo, which sponsored it, was associated with the most powerful magicians. But no one knew what the cunning and greedy Vitego was actually hiding. Only Miela was able to get through to the lady in the dungeon to become a worthy teacher for her. Unlike all the other guards, Madame never bullied the little girl. So for the first time in a long time, the heroine felt joy because she could talk to someone. But most of all, Miss was delighted by the rare surprises that the aristocrat left for her. So one day, Seafiel discovered some candy that Miela seemed to have deliberately forgotten in the dungeon. At that moment, the lady was still so young that she could not resist such a gift. She had never tasted anything so delicious before, because she was poorly fed. Therefore, the girl's joy knew no bounds when she finally felt the taste of candy. But her heart sank treacherously when Shu discovered that the candies were missing. But then the teacher did not scold the girl, although she clearly guessed what had happened. This gave the lady hope that Miela really did secretly care for her. But the little girl didn't even have time to thank the teacher for sharing her food with her. The guards around were constantly on guard, as Seafiel was carefully guarded. Shu knew about this, so she deliberately rudely interrupted the little girl, who was trying to explain herself to her. At that moment, the heroine realized with horror that she shouldn't have talked about candy at all. However, she did not regret having tried the forbidden sweetness, although no one allowed her. The girl understood that even for random kindness, it was advisable to thank the people who helped her. In her dark and cold prison, she first noticed a flower that had miraculously sprouted. It was this one that Seafiel decided to give to Miela, who was constantly studying with her and forgot her gifts. But everything turned out to be completely different from what the heroine initially thought, hoping only for the best. Her feelings were trampled along with the flower that Shu cruelly rejected. All this time, the little girl hoped that at least the teacher treated her well. But the truth was that Madame was using Lady to climb the career ladder. From that moment on, the heroine forever closed her heart to Miela, not wanting to accept her. But now she knew that adults always had reasons for their cruel behavior towards children. So the lady did not blame the teacher for her indifference, since she knew too little. She remembered that during her illness several years later, Madame had visited her personally. The woman did not spare herself to help Seafiel recover from a serious illness. At that moment, she kept whispering something to the heroine, but the girl couldn't hear the words. And soon Miela visited the student for the last time, since she did not come again. After some time, Seafiel learned that the woman had died while searching for a suitable medicine for her. So Miss didn't hold a grudge against Shu, although she remembered the pain and cruelty he had caused her. But now the girl had to focus on choosing a candidate for the role of her teacher. Although the little girl wrote down the woman's name in her book of revenge, she placed it on the last line. Besides, of all the people in the room, Mela was the one who was most suited to her training. But the heroine wasn't sure that Vitego hadn't sent her to spy on his daughter. Right now, the lady needed to somehow drive out the guys who were clearly spies. The men were ready to answer any of the little girl's questions, just so they could continue teaching her. So Seafiel, with a sly smile, asked them to tell her about the Rem Dragon's main achievements. Naturally, this question baffled the spies, who had only studied the history of Alurgo. But for Miela, this topic was very simple, since she had personally written several studies on it. So the woman became the only person who answered all of the young lady's questions. Her deep knowledge amazed even her assistants, as they did not expect such interest from a person. This is how Seafiel easily chose a suitable teacher for herself, who completely satisfied her. Even in her past life, she was able to see how smart teacher Miela was. Therefore, the lady did not even think of considering any of the cunning spies for this role. The little girl had a huge number of questions for Shu, who could find the answer to everything. Previously, the girl was afraid to ask them so as not to anger the teacher, but now everything was different. So the heroine was even ready to cross Miela's name out of the revenge notebook, if she turned out to be good. As a result, after just a few days, long sessions between the lady and Madame began at the estate. They went on for so long that the maids grew impatient while they waited for them to end. But the little girl always felt that what she had managed to achieve during her studies was not enough. So Miela personally had to stop the inquisitive girl who was bombarding her with questions. Until now, a small fear of the teacher remained within the heroine, who remained the same. But she was still glad that she had made the right choice in appointing Shu as a teacher. This woman was considered a genius everywhere, and the lady, due to her reincarnation, easily kept up with her thoughts. Only the appearance of the maids that evening interrupted the activity, which had already lasted for many hours. The assistants still carefully monitored the baby's schedule and adhered to the regime. For this reason, they could hardly restrain themselves from making a scene with the lady who detained the girl. But Sifil was against this, since she herself could not tear herself away from the fascinating activity. She was sorry to say goodbye to Miela, even though they were only parting for one evening. Suddenly, the lady noticed that the teacher's expression was for some reason very sad. But the heroine was sure that the woman was happy when she was accepted to work for the Rem Dragons. So the lady had no idea why Shu was reacting to her like that. In any case, Sifil was glad that she now had two teachers at once. The first to remain was Miela, who was responsible for all matters related to science, and the second was Loria Maliana, who had to tell the little girl everything about etiquette. The girl knew almost nothing about this woman, but she had studied abroad for many years. Since few people from the Empire were ready to deal with dragons, they called her. But all this time, the little girl neglected her etiquette lessons, staying with Miela instead. As a result, she now felt ashamed for ignoring such a sweet woman. But it turned out that Loria was an understanding lady and was not at all angry with the young lady. The woman wanted to create all the conditions for the little girl to relax during her lessons. This is how the girl found herself drawn into a relaxing massage that she had never even dreamed of. Although Maliana was supposed to tell the ladies about etiquette, she spent a lot of time talking about beauty lessons. Each lesson was exciting for Safiel, who had never taken care of herself before. The little girl noticed only one odd thing about the woman, which raised questions in her head. It was noticeable on Loria's face that the corners of her lips moved unnaturally when she smiled. It seemed as if the woman had once resorted to popular beauty injections. These procedures were not prohibited in the Empire, although they were not provided to every person. The little girl had no intention of accusing the lady of wanting to become beautiful by all popular standards. Instead, she obediently accepted the adult cream that Loria used on her. Unlike the strict Miela, Maliana seemed like a kind and gentle woman during her training. But the heroine was afraid that the teacher would change her behavior if she found out about her lineage. Therefore, Sifil continued to remain silent about her origins, which might not please everyone. The lessons exhausted the little girl so much that every evening she accepted the care with pleasure. However, no matter how tired the girl was, she did not regret being so busy. She was practically ready to idolize the smart Miela for her teaching abilities. But the lady still had questions about how Shu was perceived by all the other servants. But the maid had no right to spread such information, even though she knew everything perfectly well. However, the girl's pleading and sweet look quickly made the assistant change her mind. The girl loved the young lady so much that she could never refuse her desire to learn something. The lady had no idea that everyone in the estate was wary of the young teacher. Shu periodically seemed detached to everyone, as if she had learned something unusual for herself. The heroine herself noticed Miela's suspicious thoughtfulness, which she had never suffered from before. But what surprised the little girl most was that everyone knew that the Shu belonged to the Allergo genus. The girl had no idea that the snake personally tested the woman to see if she was telling the truth. Like everyone else in the estate, the lady had no doubt that the snake had vetted the candidates correctly. So the servants were wary of Miela only because of her strange behavior. The maid, personally, had no doubt that otherwise the snake would not have let the lady into the estate. But everything didn't explain to the heroine why the teacher came to the Rem Dragon estate. She was sure that Shu was hiding some secret, because that was how it was in her past life. And the girl hit the nail on the head. Although she could not prove the strict teacher's intentions, Miela carefully hid from everyone the reason why she came to the enemy estate. She was so worried that she kept looking around while looking through things. And this time, Loria knocked on her door, which scared the wary Shu to death. Madame would have liked to avoid this meeting, but she understood that it would arouse unacceptable suspicions, so she had to go out and talk to Maliana, even though she tried not to talk to anyone. At the same time, the heroine was happily running around the estate, playing tag with her favorite maids. So the girl accidentally bumped into the teachers who were talking together in the corridor. She immediately found it suspicious that Miela had not invited Loria into her room. The lady had doubted Shu before, and now her misunderstanding only grew stronger. So the little girl carefully slipped into the woman's room while no one was looking. This room was no different from all the others in the estate for servants. To her surprise, the girl found almost no personal belongings of Miela, who lived here. No matter how much Miss looked around, she didn't notice anything suspicious inside. The only thing that caught Seafield's attention was the medallion, which lay modestly in a prominent place. Since the heroine had broken the rules, she continued to the end. But then she heard a noise from the side. The little girl, in a panic, began to look for a place to hide so that Madame would not notice her. During the process, the lady behaved so carelessly that she accidentally hit her head on the table. But all this led to her noticing another unusual object in Miela's room. It was a music case, which lay modestly in the most inconspicuous place in the room. Seafield was certain that Shu had never been interested in art, devoting herself to science, so Miss could not explain to herself why the teacher needed such a thing. Meanwhile, Miela learned from Loria terrible details about the girl's life in the estate. For some reason, Maliana brazenly lied about Seafield not living long in the Rem Dragon estate. She deliberately spread rumors that the dragons had chosen this girl for a reason. Every word about Seafield's difficult fate echoed with pain in the heart of the young teacher. She wouldn't want the girl to actually become a victim, as Loria said. Maliana was sure that the Rem Dragons had not taken the baby from a rival family without reason. So the woman believed that only a cruel death awaited the lady in this place in the future. This information shocked Miela, who did not want such a fate for her student. She was no longer able to talk to her colleague, even though she was kind to her. Shu didn't tell anyone about this, but Seafield was dear to her for certain reasons. Therefore, the woman was going to do everything to save the baby from a terrible death in this place. Only the heroine accidentally found confirmation in Miela's things that she was for her. But for several more days, the heroine only silently played chess with the Duke. Daihan was pleased to notice that the girl was getting better at games of wit. He was sure that among people, the little girl would quickly become something like a real genius. In fact, the heroine had often played chess before, which is why she showed such results, but she would never have admitted to the Duke where she learned to play so quickly. During their conversations, the lady yawned frequently, which did not escape the attentive dragon's notice. Even the maids noted that Seafield had been constantly feeling sleepy lately, but the girl attributed all this to constant lessons with teachers and her busy schedule. However, at that moment, all the words, for some reason, began to slip past her young consciousness. No matter how hard the heroine tried, she could not concentrate on the conversation between the Duke and the maid. All this led to the girl suddenly losing consciousness right in the middle of the day. But the little girl couldn't afford to miss even one day of exciting learning. As soon as she woke up, the miss noticed with alarm that the doctor was still around her. Now Seafield felt better, but this condition could well be called temporary. The maid sadly explained to her mistress that she had been poisoned by the pits of a red apricot. Since the assistants carefully monitored Seafield's food, they did not know how this happened. During the time the lady was unconscious, an investigation was carried out throughout the estate. And in the end, they found this poison in Miela's things, so they blamed this woman for everything. But the heroine immediately suspected a trick, since she had never seen anything like this from Shu before. She was absolutely sure that she had carefully examined the teacher's things, and there was no poison there. Besides, the woman was an excellent botanist, so she would definitely kill the lady if she wanted to. The lady herself knew that she had no signs of poisoning when she ingested the poison, so Seafield couldn't sit still while Miela was being falsely accused of this matter. Her entire consciousness was filled with the desire to find out the truth in this complicated case. But at the most inopportune moment, a purple liquid suddenly began to flow from the girl's nose. There was no doubt that it was blood, but for some reason, its color was different from usual. Despite all her experience, the maid had no idea how to help the little girl in such a strange situation. The lady herself had difficulty understanding why such unpleasant changes had occurred to her body. She could only blame the dishes, which had been poisoned in advance by the attacker. But at that very moment, a massive magical earthquake shook the entire estate. The assistant barely managed to cover the girl with her body, in case crumbs fell from the ceiling. They both guessed that the earthquake was caused by a mage, since there shouldn't be any in that area. While the maid was rescuing Seafield, she carefully looked around, looking for danger. Eventually, the lady noticed a figure slowly approaching her, even through the thick fog. In contrast, the female figure wore a bandage that protected her from the fumes of the sleeping gas. As soon as the heroine recognized Miela, she lost consciousness and woke up in the carriage sometime later. The girl could not understand why the woman had kidnapped her from the safe estate. Miela didn't miss the fact that the little girl had come to her senses, But she had no time to pay attention to the lady. Shu planned to get the girl to a doctor as soon as possible to stabilize her condition. But the carriage was shaking so violently that the heroine wasn't sure she would make it to the nearest doctor. Her eyes gradually closed due to weakness throughout her body, because the baby was poisoned. It was at this moment that Seafield's ring, which contained powerful magic, was activated. A barely noticeable silhouette quietly flew out of it and carefully approached the young lady. This ghost was Miela's memory, as the ring involved people nearby. The transparent woman was summoned to save Sefiel in such a dangerous moment. So, unexpectedly for herself, the little girl plunged into Miela's memories, where she was drawn into. She looked around in surprise, as she couldn't figure out what kind of place she had ended up in. Some unknown man was cursing at the teacher for wanting to go to the Allergo estate in person. Seafiel watched closely at the people who for some reason did not notice her presence. On the table, she noticed a framed photograph in which she recognized Miela with some woman. For some reason, the unknown lady seemed familiar to the heroine, although she did not remember her appearance. Meanwhile, the quarrel between the man and Miela escalated more and more. The woman was in pain over the loss of her sister, and therefore did not want to listen to her friend. It was clear from her face how much Miela suffered because of the death of her loved one. The heroine wasn't sure she could listen to such loud and painful words. Suddenly, she heard that Miela's sister, Lilia, had given birth to an illegitimate daughter and died. This woman was taken into the hands of Duke Allergo, and since then, the younger sister has never seen the older one. The man knew Lilia well, so he mourned her death as much as his friend Miela. At that moment, Sefiel realized that she was related to her teacher. She couldn't even imagine that this was the reason why Shu was looking for her in different places. The aristocrat was sure that Lilia's daughter was clearly not killed, since Vitego liked to use people. But he didn't want Miela to devote her entire life to her older sister's unknown child. But the teacher didn't listen to her mentor, so she still came to the lady in her past life. Even in these memories, she was burning with the desire to help her daughter Lilia, even though she didn't know her by sight. But the little girl still couldn't believe that the accidents in her life were special. She never thought of Miela as an aunt who carefully watched over her from the side. The teacher's eyes were always filled with strictness towards the girl, whom she taught science well. In the past, the lady thought that she was just imagining the pitiful emotions that appeared on the lady's face. After all, at their first meeting, Miela was clearly upset, as she did not expect the lady to be in such a bad state. The little girl was cornered and was afraid of every person who approached her from her father. That's why, on the day they met, the girl didn't care about the emotions that were reflected on the teacher's face. She was only worried about how pathetic she looked in front of her, and she couldn't do anything to fix it. Only now was the heroine able to look at herself from the outside and realized how lost she had been. The past, Seafield tried her best to avoid any contact with the adults who came to see her. Perhaps this was the reason why Miela did not become closer to the baby. Suddenly, the events shifted back to the office, where all the memories began. Miela knew about Seafield's illness, so she was going to find a cure for it herself. Her friend tried to stop the woman from putting herself in danger, but it was no use. The heroine still remembered that it was after that illness that she stopped seeing her teacher. It was no secret that Vitego had deliberately infected his daughter, although not everyone knew his motives. But Seafield had lived her entire life in prison, so there was no question of any independent infection. Therefore, even the little girl had no doubt that her father had intentionally acted so cruelly. He needed this in order to get rid of Miela, whose family ties he had learned about. The man had calculated everything correctly, and Shu could not leave Sefiel when she became very ill. The woman selflessly conducted all the experiments on herself in order to ultimately find a cure. Although in reality, she regretted that she never opened her heart to the girl. Tears welled up in the heroine's eyes when she learned the whole truth about her aunt's death in a past life. But at that moment, the memories ended, as if some movie had ended, and the girl was thrown back into the carriage, where she flew around all the walls because she was not secured. For the first time in her life, Sefiel was so close to death that she became seriously frightened. In fact, the heir did not miss the fact that some unpleasant misfortune had befallen the young lady. He had placed protective magic into the ring in advance, and now it was screaming that the girl was in danger. Usually, Erga did not interfere in such matters, but now there was neither grandfather nor father in the estate. Something has already happened to Seafield, and things can only get worse if we continue to do nothing. The servants were already causing panic in the estate, which the young heir could hear even through closed doors. It was not difficult for him to find the kidnapper, who was desperately trying to take the lady as far away as possible. In such situations, the young man never acted softly, wanting to punish his opponent to the fullest extent. So he called the panther with him, who had been sleeping peacefully somewhere in the estate garden all this time. Their duo was impossible to defeat, as each of them had their own good skills. Meanwhile, assistants were already scouring the surrounding area in the hope of finding the baby. The maids were most worried about the fact that none of the owners were at home. They understood that in their absence, control of the search would pass to them. So the girls did not hesitate when they gave orders to the knights who were supposed to find the lady. The assistants' eyes burned with righteous anger because the most sacred thing had just been taken from them. Meanwhile, the bandage with Seafiel was still rushing quickly through the forest in the hope of being rescued. But suddenly, the teacher realized that she had been found even earlier than she had originally expected. A huge black beast jumped onto the carriage with the woman, not even thinking of pitying her. The result was that Mela was thrown back several meters, and the carriage's movement stopped. The woman did not immediately come to her senses from the blow, but quickly remembered little Seafiel. This caused Miela to jump to her feet, despite the fact that she had hit her head hard. But everything turned out to be fine with the baby, as the young heir held her carefully in his arms. Ergo was struck by the fragility of the girl's body, with whom he had not interacted much lately. As the panther pushed the carriage with its enormous mass, Seafiel flew upward at great speed. She didn't have enough strength to stop this flight, which could have injured the girl. But even without any effort on the heroine's part, she landed softly in someone's warm hands. Erga tried to catch the lady so that nothing bad would happen to her after the carriage stopped. The poison was still active in the girl's blood, so she could barely open her eyes. At the sight of the heir, the little girl's heart sank with joy, because he didn't often save her. But all of Seafiel's thoughts were now occupied with Miela, whom she saw nowhere. Suddenly, the little girl discovered with horror that something was wrong with the woman at that moment. The heroine could not allow the death of the teacher, who was actually her aunt. But it was difficult to argue with the Duke when he was deciding on punishment. As luck would have it, the lady had too little strength to object to the cruel and skillful heir. Almost losing consciousness, she still managed to whisper that she had questions for this lady, so the entire decision was left up to Erga, who found it easier to kill the woman immediately. Only after several days did the heroine come to her senses, as her condition was serious. Dai-Han and his servants stood anxiously near the lady's bed to help her. So the adults quickly noticed when the lady finally opened her eyes after sleeping. Consciousness gradually returned to Seafiel, who had almost died just recently. It came as a surprise to her that she lay unconscious in bed for 3 whole days. Of course, the Duke helped the baby with magic, but it was not enough. Memories were still jumbled in the head of the lady who had experienced too much, so Dai-Han personally reminded the girl that it was his son, who was passing by, who saved her. That's how they were able to quickly stop the kidnapper, who was trying to take Seafiel away. The heroine could hardly believe that she had managed to see so much during the short trip. However, there was no time for realization, because the lady needed to talk to Miela. It turned out that the heir could barely restrain himself from killing this woman right there on the spot. After the kidnapping, the servants discovered that Shu had prepared for this escape in advance. She was quite an expert in magical things, which she took advantage of with cunning. But for some reason, the heroine thought that it would not be dangerous for her to go to the strict teacher alone. Of course, she knew about all the illusory things that Miela used during her escape. Their essence was that the owner could set invisible traps at any time. The butler was still surprised that the bombs had ultimately failed to function properly. So the illusionary earthquake lasted only a few minutes instead of 2 hours. In fact, the little girl knew about this, since she herself had ruined the scrolls when she was in Madame's room. So now she could freely talk to Miela to sort everything out. It turned out that the lady's body did not hurt at all, because Dai-Han had been treating her all this time. The little girl's gratitude knew no bounds, as the Duke had already saved her life more than once. All she had to do was appease the man so that he would let her talk to Miela. As the heroine suspected, the Duke began to insist that she needed peace and rest. But the lady couldn't put off talking to Shu for long, because her actions depended on him. So the little girl honestly stated that she was eager to personally get to the bottom of the truth. This aspiration appealed to Dai-Han, who often investigated cases himself. Therefore, the Duke could no longer resist the baby's desire. Although he did not let her go from his arms, Seafiel already had a small plan that needed to be carried out as quietly as possible. For this, the lady turned to her faithful servant, because no one could handle this task better than her. For some reason, the heroine was confident that she would easily find the real culprit of her poisoning. While the little girl felt enthusiastic, Miela thought with horror about what would happen to her next. She was brought to Daihan and Seafiel as if a brutal execution was taking place right now. The teacher understood that she had done something seriously wrong, so she did not even dare raise her head. But in fact, the heroine did not plan to punish the woman who turned out to be her aunt. However, Miela did not know that the girl had accidentally learned of their relationship. The heroine had no idea where to begin this important conversation with her relative, while Shu obediently remained motionless, as she was ready to accept any punishment. For such a personal conversation, the little girl needed to meet Madame face to face, so she demanded that Daihan lower her to the ground, rather than offer her execution options. This matter now concerned only Seafiel and Miela, who had not been honest with each other before, and it was time for both of them to reveal all their cards, since it was no longer possible to hide the truth. What interested the little girl most was whether her dream about Shu corresponded to reality or not, and the lady could only learn all this from the teacher, who always remained strict with her. As scared as Seafiel was, she knew there was no turning back. So the heroine asked Miela directly if she really knew her birth mother. The woman clearly did not expect the girl to learn this amazing secret. In fact, all this time, the heroine only remembered the name of her mother, whose name was Lilia Shu. The same last name gave the little girl the idea that they really could be related. The teacher was so shocked by the revealed truth that she could not say a word. But the lady remembered well that Madame had a locket with a photograph inside. Although it was wrong to do so, Shu was a prisoner, so Elton ordered her to be searched. The assistants quickly conducted an investigation and quickly found the very same jewelry. The girl had already seen him in the teacher's room, but she didn't have time to take a closer look at him then. Her heart beat anxiously as the butler handed Miela's locket to the little girl. Everyone around was interested to know what kind of photograph was inside this thing, and only the woman knew the answer. But she had remained silent until now, so as not to be touched. All of Seafiel's suspicions were confirmed as soon as she opened the small decoration. Inside it was the very photograph that the girl had seen from the ghost in her dream. So the lady was once again convinced that she looked like the older sister of a strict teacher. Miela couldn't believe that the girl had figured out the connection between them so quickly. She planned to hide from the little girl the fact that she was her aunt until the very end. If it weren't for the magical memory that the ring revealed, Miss would never have known anything. But now her attitude towards Miela has changed dramatically, because she deserved better. Shu always thought that even the cunning Allergos couldn't uncover her secret. But now that the secret had become clear, the teacher no longer needed to hide anything. Therefore, she honestly admitted that she initially wanted to kidnap her niece. This statement caused anger among everyone in the estate, as they had become attached to the girl. It turned out that Miela had only recently learned of her sister's death and the birth of her child. But when she almost reached Seafiel, she was suddenly transported to the Remdragon estate, so Shu had no choice but to follow his only relative. The lady could understand her aunt's concern, since she had indeed been mistreated in prison. But the Remdragon's baby was feeling fine, so she didn't see any problem. Even after such a confession, the question remained as to why Miela tried to poison the girl. The maids didn't quite believe that this had never been part of the teacher's plans. But then the assistant remembered the man who had spread all these rumors about Miela. It turned out that Loria was behind everything, although she created the appearance of a good and kind aristocrat. The heroine was not surprised that Malyana began to deny her involvement in the poisoning, but she believed that Shu was misinformed, and it turned out to be true. It was from Loria that the teacher heard all those terrible rumors about Seafiel's possible death. However, Madame still did not want to admit that she had tried to harm the young lady in any way. It was easier for Malyana to shift all the blame onto Miela, who was expecting punishment anyway. The women's argument could have lasted forever, but the young heroine had everything under control. She sent one of the maids to Loria's room specifically to bring something from there, and the assistant coped with the task brilliantly so that no one noticed her absence. Malyana realized with horror that the little girl had some evidence of her guilt. The whole thing was that Seafiel needed a jar of cream that Loria had. Madame often applied this mixture to the girl's face to make her skin more beautiful. The Duke had previously heard of magic that allowed one to become a little more beautiful. And, as a teacher of etiquette and beauty, Loria constantly resorted to such procedures. Only now did Miela realize what exactly the problem had been all this time. Shu couldn't contain her emotions, because such creams were very dangerous for small children. Seafiel only found out about this by chance, and her aunt's reaction confirmed all her suspicions. The teacher knew better than anyone the composition of such creams, which were only suitable for adults. Since the heroine had not yet reached the required age, the herbs in the cream were harmful to her. None of the maids could have controlled this moment, which they did not even know about. So Miela was furious that Loria had been giving the lady that cream all this time. As before, Maliana said that she had another cream in stock for the girl. She was still trying to blame Miela for poisoning the young lady. No one expected that the heroine would suddenly admit that Shu did not have any poison. Only now Seafiel reported that she personally rummaged through the teacher's things before the poisoning. This news surprised everyone in the estate, although the miss could well have done so out of curiosity. When the girl climbed into Miela's bag, she found only magic scrolls in it. Therefore, she was absolutely sure that Shu did not take any poisons or herbs with her. So there was only one option left, no matter how Loria denied her guilt. The Duke had the most questions for the girl, because the lady knew about Miela's magical scrolls. Imagine everyone's surprise when Seafiel announced that she had broken them herself. In fact, the heroine knew all the runes well, which is why she reduced the duration of the spells. Only the teacher realized what a gifted child she was dealing with. After all, it took Miela herself several years to draw all these signs. From now on, the heroine will forever be remembered by Shu as a real little genius. The Duke couldn't just ignore the fact that the teacher had been told some rumors. No one expected that Madame would believe that Seafiel was destined to die of madness. Everyone in the estate knew the truth, that the Duchess could have lived on if not for this illness. Even the little girl didn't think that Loria's rumors about her would be so cruel and false. This whole situation deeply angered Daihan, who hated disorder. He remembered that all this time, Seafiel was gradually getting worse, and no one could help her. Ultimately, everything came to the point that the girl began to show symptoms of fatal poisoning. So it was understandable why Miela decided to kidnap the baby, because she wanted to save her. Therefore, all the wrath of the master fell upon poor Loria, who had harmed everyone with her stupidity. At that moment, even Seafiel's sweet request could not stop Daihan from killing him. The man hated people who harmed everyone around them, and then did not take responsibility. As a result, Maliana lost consciousness from the mere thought that death awaited her. Before the little girl had time to look around, both women were taken away to their rooms for a while. The butler quickly dealt with the situation when the real culprit became clear, and now Elton planned to drop all charges against Miela, who turned out to be a good person. Only one Duke remained by the baby's side, as he wanted to support her after everything. The man understood that the girl must have been very scared, even though she looked brave. What Daihan was most worried about was that the lady would now have a lot of questions for him. In fact, Seafiel really did want to know more about what happened to the Duchess, but the heroine did not regret staying with the Rem Dragons, so she did not ask questions. Seeing the baby's sweet smile, Daihan's desire to protect her in the future increased. His heart sank with pain as he remembered that the lady would become his son's bride. If possible, the Duke would like to avoid this, because the fate of the dragon's wives was unclear. So he would like the young heir to no longer meet with his bride. In fact, the boy himself adhered to this rule, even without orders from his father. Now he's feeling a little worse, because he's absorbed most of the girl's poison. Thanks to this, Seafiel's condition stabilized, so the guy did not regret anything. He spent most of his time in the room anyway, so he could lie around in pain. Erga had long since become accustomed to the dragon attacks that periodically happened to his body. No matter how hard Elton tried to help the young master, people knew little about dragons. Therefore, the heir locked himself in the tower, just so as not to harm anyone during the attack. He allowed only his butler to visit him, and he was distinguished by his ability to survive in any situation. Ergo was ready to carry his heavy burden on his own from childhood, so he didn't regret anything.